G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So one of my favourite guilty pleasures is just kicking back and binging through a good TV series. Raised by Wolves was my most recent one, looking forward to Season 2 by the way, but one thing I feel exactly zero guilt about is how much I enjoy playing Best Fiends. Best Fiends gives me an endless source of fun that I can access anytime right on my phone. It's a match 3 puzzle game like none other, with literally thousands of levels and new content added all the time. I've been playing for some time now and I'm a little obsessed. Okay, well, maybe a lot obsessed, but I've really enjoyed the levels and the puzzles, especially some of the side quests as of late. I think I've been playing it casually for like just over a year now, and I'm a little over 900 levels in my own game, and I'm still finding new elements to the game. And I think that's what I love about Best Fiends the most. It is a fantastic boredom quencher, it's great for casual gameplay in moments of downtime throughout the day, but I also love that more levels, events, challenges are always being added, so the game never really runs out of things to do. The game is also free to download, and with Best Fiends, there's something new today, and tomorrow, and every day after that. So if you never get tired of solving puzzles, good news, with Best Fiends, the fun never ends. So, download Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. So, I'm going to try and report this with as little dramatic flair as possible because it seems like people sometimes get carried away with the storytelling when reporting something like this, and I want to avoid that if I can. So this happened a long time ago, and not even in America, but for the first time the other day I was discussing it, and suddenly realized that it actually involves 3 of the major factors associated with a lot of the missing 411 cases. A body of water, a dog behaving extremely unusually, and large amounts of granite. So, I was in my mid-teens at the time, and due to the unusual circumstances, my dad had woken me up in the middle of the night to walk the dog with him and have a chat. It was around 2 in the morning. It was a full moon and a very bright night with great visibility. The skies were clear and we were walking on a granite hill, an extinct volcano in fact, that has a valley in the middle with a sort of small lake in it. We had walked around the lake before starting up the side of the valley towards the ridge with the dog on a leash. As we began to approach the top of the slope, the dog stopped dead and point blank refused to come any further in the direction that we were walking. What I mean too is that he was literally a dead weight on the leash, and we would have had to have literally bodily dragged him to move him even an inch further forward. We realized that he had tucked his tail between his legs, was visibly shaking, and was in a curled crouch, making himself as small as possible. He was also entirely fixated on something ahead of us that we hadn't actually noticed or paid attention to beforehand. It appeared to be a straight black line emerging vertically from the ground. I remember thinking at first that it was a plastic tube that used to protect vulnerable saplings from deer because in the first moments we became aware of it, there were no discernible features whatsoever other than a sort of black vertical bar. But as we watched, the straight black bar unfurled into the crude shape of a humanoid I estimate to have been around 8 feet tall. Unfurled is the best term that I can think of to describe this process, but if you've ever seen a butterfly emerge from a sort of chrysalis, it was something like that. The figure though was entirely jet black, but there were no visible features or contrast within it to any degree, despite the bright moonlight, and black doesn't cover just how dark this thing actually was. It was what I imagine a black hole might look like, and although the figure itself wasn't remotely transparent or unsubstantial, the outline was slightly fuzzy or blurred, almost like something that's vibrating extremely quickly or a washing machine on a high spin cycle or something. Also, it did not have human proportions. It was almost like a child's drawing of a stick man, but with disproportionately long arms and legs. If you're imagining something like a stick insect made out of the material Vanta Black in the rough shape of a person, then you're pretty close to the mark. The head was unusually small though, and I remember the top of the head being somewhat flat, although my dad doesn't. In every other respect, our recollections of the event are identical though, which is what tells me that I'm not crazy. This all happened within probably under a minute, and then it turned and faced us. I'm not going to give it a melodramatic description, and in fact, words can't really do it justice, but although it lacked any features whatsoever that might be identified as eyes or a face, you could feel this thing's attention on you. Instantly, too, every hair on my body stood erect, and I broke out in goosebumps. I turned to my dad and said, "Dad, what is that thing?" He's one of the most skeptical and level-headed people that I know, so what really freaked me out was that his answer was just, "I don't know, but we need to get out of here right now." And as a young man, being able to detect genuine fear in my dad's voice, that itself was quite unsettling. We immediately began to walk sideways away from the figure so as to not entirely turn our backs on it, and the minute that we began moving away, it was like a spell was broken on the dog, who began literally dragging us. But then, the figure followed us for more than 5 minutes, maintaining the same distance at all times. It walked with large, slow, deliberate strides, and I remember its arms swung in long arcs as it moved. At no point did it show any sign of aggression, mind you. It just simply followed, maintaining the same distance from us the entire time. It was perfectly and completely silent. There wasn't a sound when it was following us, which was really weird. We were in a highly adrenalized state during this pursuit, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. But we exchanged very few words other than whispers like, "Is it still following us?" and "Don't look at it." It never even crossed our minds to run, which, in hindsight, seems unusual given that neither of us even entertained the possibility that this was just another person out for a walk. In the moment, we both just had an almost literally overwhelming sense of wrongness about the situation, I think. And after about 5 minutes, I stopped. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "This is completely insane. What is going on? What is that thing?" And when we stopped, it stopped. And again, just turned to stand facing us straight on. Because of the total lack of features, though, it may as well have been facing directly away from us, but like I say, there was a definite physical sense of when this thing's awareness was focused on you. We stood in total silence. The dog continued trying to drag us away. It stood motionless for a minute or two, and then, as we watched, it turned, sank down into the solid ground, and just disappeared. Immediately, it felt like some sort of a charge in the air had dissipated, and we began power walking back to the car. When we got back, we were still buzzing with adrenaline, obviously, and woke everyone up to tell them what we'd seen. And that's the story. I can't really add anything else that wouldn't just be, well, dramatic flourishes for storytelling purposes. The dog's behavior was extremely uncharacteristic of him. If we had encountered another person under the same circumstances, there's not a doubt in my mind that he would have been barking and straining on his leash to approach them rather than get away like that. That's partly why he was on a lead too, but also because he was a rescue and very prone to chasing animals and disappearing for like 20 minutes or so. Needless to say though, we were both quite shaken as neither of us could really come up with any plausible rationale for what we'd experienced. Occasionally over the years, people have suggested that it was a broken spectre, where our own shadows were being cast by the moon on a fog bank or low cloud, but I just cannot accept that explanation. There just wasn't any fog or clouds present, and visibility was excellent due to both clear air and the bright moonlight. And honestly, I have no real theories about what we saw, nor does my dad. Although I still consider myself to be a naturally skeptical person, this definitely completely shattered my ability to dismiss other people's stories of high strangeness and wild theories, even those that at face value seem absurd. I can hardly laugh in someone's face when they say that they think Bigfoot is real but comes from another dimension, for example, or that something otherworldly is taking people in the wilderness. Although, obviously, I have no reason to believe this was Bigfoot, and the incident occurred in Scotland of all places. Years after the fact, though, and years ago now, I found a thread on a bushcraft forum where people were discussing spooky experiences in the outdoors. And to my amazement, there was actually a hunter who reported seeing the exact same thing crossing a clearing in the woods from a hunting hide during a full moon in America. I don't have a link because this was a long time ago, but they reported identical details. The small head, the long arms that moved in sort of pendulous arcs when it walked, the slow, deliberate stride, the total blackness and lack of features, and even the fuzzy outline that they described in exactly the same way, as if it was vibrating. Obviously, you can make of this what you will. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, and I'm not married to any particular theory about what we saw. I just thought that it was worth sharing here. But before I finish, I want to briefly touch on two of the more obvious explanations for what we experienced and why I struggle to accept them. But first, because it's relevant to one of them, let me mention that there are at least some caves on this hill and that they've been associated with spooky stuff before, although I didn't know this at the time. In 1836, a group of schoolboys found a small entrance to a previously unknown cave on the hill near where this occurred that contained 17 miniature coffins containing what we would describe today as voodoo dolls, and some of them are still on display in the Scottish National Museum today. But anyway, now for the rational explanations. So the first one is that we were hallucinating. The problem with this is that the dog's strange behavior was caused by something unrelated, but in the familiar environment, in the dark that we entered, some kind of adrenalized state where our minds project a tangible threat onto an unexpected object, possibly actually one of those tubes used to protect trees I mentioned earlier, and we both hallucinated the same thing? I don't know. I find this hard to accept because of the specific details that we both recalled afterwards. Long arms, small head, vibrating outline, slow deliberate stride, swinging arms, strong sense of when its attention was focused on us. And all of this despite not actually talking about what we were seeing at the time, and also that the dog was very clearly focused on the same thing as we were, and absolutely terrified. The second is that it was exactly what it appeared to be. A very unusually tall black-skinned individual, emaciated to the verge of death, that was vibrating. In this scenario, they would have emerged from a hole in the ground, remember the cave, and perhaps were shivering from the cold. It is Scotland after all. They then followed us in silence before descending back underground via another hole. And you know what? I can almost accept this, and that due to the adrenaline, our brains interpret it as being more dramatically strange than it actually was. The problem with this theory is that it would still be really, really weird, right? But it does bring us back into the tangible world of things, I suppose, that actually exist, because although Scotland is something like 98% white, there are still thousands of Scottish people with black skin, and it's possible some of them are very tall, I suppose. I guess the only thing that's worth maybe adding to this is that this event seemed to flick some switch in my head that made me no longer remotely afraid of the dark under any circumstances. You'd think that it would have gone the other way, and I'm not LARPing as a vampire or some possessed creature of the night or anything, but I worked in a bakery at the time and walked to work along a river in the deep valley in the middle of the night. Sometimes it was pitch black to the extent that you would have to feel your way ahead with your hands, and I'm not ashamed to admit that sometimes I get a bit spooked, especially when a fox suddenly screamed right next to you. But after this event, just never again. I can walk through the deepest, darkest forest, abandoned building or mine in complete darkness without feeling even the slightest trepidation since this incident. And I don't really know why, but it's to the extent that people have commented on it. I don't know how you can do that sort of thing. Now, not being afraid of the dark is hardly a superpower, but for me it was always a markedly less intimidating experience after this encounter, and I really can't rationalize why, because It seems like it would make so much more sense for it to have instilled a fear of the dark rather than removed it. Anyway, that's really all I have to say, and in the unlikely event that you've seen the same thing, then please do let me know, because I really want to try and figure this out. If anyone has any questions, I'm really happy to answer, but I don't think I've left anything relevant out really, so perhaps this is it. In any case, thanks for listening, and here's hoping that this doesn't happen again. This happened back in 2019, around November 2nd, I believe. Also, this, I can assure you, is true, though not sure if this was just a coincidence or what it was. So, back in 2019, I was pretty much depressed the whole year. Not really to the point where it was too bad, but let's just say that I stopped wearing a seatbelt, smoked 2 times as many cigarettes as I would have normally, and didn't care much about my well-being for the most part. Due to this, and things getting worse mentally, I did a lot of dumb things, supernatural-wise. I've always known not to speak to the dead, knowing that when you speak to one spirit, the rest can hear you as well. I've always been extremely superstitious and believe in the paranormal, supernatural 100%. But anyway, I live next to this huge cemetery and drive by it every day since it's right across from my neighborhood. Due to my superstitions and believing that the dead can do things us humans aren't capable of, each day I would scream out of the window when passing the cemetery, begging for one of the spirits to get me in a car accident. This habit started on November 2nd, I believe, so I did that each day while driving past the cemetery. Lo and behold, November 6th, I was driving to work at about 4:30 in the morning. I go the same way every day and was coming up to a red light, when out of nowhere, and I kid you not, this was literally out of nowhere, I heard a loud honk from behind me and was rear-ended by one of those big white RG&E trucks that fix telephone poles and stuff. Since I was at the red light, it basically pushed my car forward into the middle of the intersection, and once again out of nowhere, I was T-boned by some random old dude in a van with his wife. I was driving an '05 Nissan Sentra at the time, and it was completely wrecked, literally demolished, and I had not one scratch on me at all. My knees were extremely bruised. I have no idea how that happened, but that was pretty much it. This also happened literally on the main road coming out of my neighborhood, about a mile down from that cemetery. There are never, and I mean never, any cars this early in the morning. And maybe one every now and then, but even that is rare for the most part. Also, while I was talking to the old man, they lived in a town literally 40 minutes away and were driving to the park. The whole story is just so weird, and it honestly kind of creeps me out, but yeah. I was in an extremely bad financial situation, so I was stuck without a car for quite some time. When I was driving by the cemetery begging to be in an accident, I meant that I wanted it to end, so I think whichever spirit heard me or whatever wanted to mess with me or something, I don't know, take it as you will. Maybe this was an extremely weird coincidence, but if not, always remember to be careful what you wish for. So, my mum is a paramedic, been in the NHS for like 30 plus years, a well-known member of staff. And, like her reputation, she's known for her fair share of ghost stories about the old morgue in northwest England, not being specific for privacy reasons, which has now been torn down with the rest of the hospital and has a housing estate on it. Her most freaky one, though, has to be when they dropped off an expired patient at the morgue. So this happened back in the 90s when the hospital was still used for the most part. They had been in the morgue, handing over an expired patient like I mentioned. And this next bit of info is pretty important to the story, but the ambulance bay was a concrete garage for the most part, with one tiny dim light inside, and was directly opposite the morgue or mortuary. The ambulance needed a key to lock all the doors too. So Mum and her colleague walked out of the morgue, chatting away like they normally did, when her colleague stopped dead and stared into the ambulance bay. Because there in the far corner, behind the dim light, was a dark figure just sort of standing there. Another important bit of info too is that this was at night time. They brushed it off though, just as an object at the back of the bay after it didn't move for some time, and the light made it difficult to see too, so, like I said, they just sort of shrugged it off. They made their way to the ambulance, thinking nothing of it, and got in, using the key to unlock it. My mum put the key in the ignition, but didn't turn the engine on, as they had to fill out the rest of the paperwork still. And while they were filling out paperwork, the ambulance doors just suddenly locked. All of them, from the outside. They froze, sort of looked at each other, then looked up in front of them. And as they looked up, both of their eyes locked onto the door of the morgue, which they had watched swing open. And then another figure walked silently out of it and began to walk straight for the ambulance. In my mum's own words, they apparently bricked it, starting to freak out as this thing got closer. They couldn't get out of the ambulance due to it being locked from the outside. Their only choice was to drive off, and as they did, the figure just vanished into thin air, and the morgue door was still wide open. Now, I know some of you might be saying that couldn't they just go back to their station? Well, that hospital was their ambulance station. They refused to go back too until it was bright outside. My mum recalls them coming back in the morning, and her colleagues describing her being sheet white. They were the same after my mum told them the story too. They all refused to park there after that, and even avoided going to the morgue at all if possible. But whoever lives on that site now, I really feel sorry for them. She has a lot of ghost stories from that place, and heck, some of them are even quite amusing. They're genuinely mixed up with some of my mum's dark sarcasm. I'll definitely share some of them too if you guys are down for that. But generally speaking, ghost stuff just never really bothered my mother, even up until that point because, well, she'd experienced so much. But this one, she always said just never really sat right with her. So this was back in 2015 when I was 16 years old. I'm a male as well, by the way. So this was in summer when both my parents went to visit some relatives out of town, and they wouldn't be home for like 3 days. I was the only child that was left in this house, and my grandma did visit me every single day to make me lunch and whatnot. I actually didn't ask her to do that because, well, I knew how to cook, but, I mean, who can stop old Nan, right? But of course, she didn't stay during the nights, and that was when I pretty much went wild. Watching movies, gaming, watching YouTube, just as much as I wanted. I mean, everything you could picture a 16-year-old doing when his parents aren't home. And on the second night, I was just watching a movie, and I ran out of chips, paused the movie, and went down into the kitchen to grab some more. When all of a sudden, I hear a window break and a door opening. The kitchen was separated from the living room where the door was opened. I quickly grabbed a knife and slowly peeked my head around. And there he was, a tall guy around, I would say 2 meters tall at least, had a baseball cap, some old jacket, probably leather. It was torn on the right sleeve, but my phone was in the room upstairs. From the kitchen door, the stairs were directly to its right, so in my stupid mind, I was thinking that I could sneak past him and lock myself in. He was going through the shelf next to the door very loudly, I must say, and so I got to the stairs somehow, and he turned around at the last second and realized that I was there. Out of fear, I guess, I just sort of screamed and threw the knife at him, and I missed him, but the wall beside his head had the knife sticking in there. I guess he got scared too by me and my savage screaming and the throwing of the knife, and so he just ran before I could grab another knife. Yes, I ran back to get another one. Adrenaline is one heck of a thing, right? And when I saw that he left, I ran to my room and I called the cops. They came quickly and just took some fingerprints and any DNA samples that they could find. The next morning, I called my parents and they came back around noon. I don't know why, but I kept the knife lodged in the wall next to the door too, but The first question they asked is, why is there a knife in the wall? We eventually changed the front door with a really heavy-duty one this time, and they arrested the guy within the same week. And one of the cops told me that the guy was allegedly thinking that I was going to kill him and tried to call the police on an attempted murder or something. Go figure, right? So I guess the moral of the story is hide when someone is robbing your house, or at the very least, learn how to act like a maniac, like I did. About 5 to 6 months ago, my partner and I were struggling to find an apartment with a landlord that would rent us. With the arrival of our daughter approaching quickly, we were becoming quite desperate in finding a place to move into. Eventually, we found a relatively inexpensive 2-bedroom apartment for rent, and the landlord happily rented it to us. About a week before we moved all of our belongings into the apartment and unpacked, my daughter had been born, and we began filling the walls with artwork and placing decor amongst the various countertops and shelves and whatnot, and my partner was very enthusiastic about arranging and decorating everything to make it feel like a home. Around a month into living in this apartment, I grew to feel a little uneasy around nightfall. Originally, I just sort of brushed it off as me being a new father, thinking it's simply me being protective over my new daughter and my partner. At about 3.5 months of living in the apartment, aside from the occasional uneasiness during the night, everything felt okay and safe. But one night, I had been laying on my couch at about 2 a.m. The way the unit is built as well allows me to see straight down the kitchen hallway to where the bathroom and the main bedroom doorways are when I was laying on the couch. And as I was laying there, I began to see a sort of swift, dark apparition go from the bedroom doorway to the cabinets in the hallway. It began to look as if something kept running back and forth from where my partner and child were sleeping to the unit beside us. Obviously, this sight made me feel a little bit concerned, so I went into the bedroom with my sleeping family and I went to bed. The next week, my partner and I were sitting on the couch together in the afternoon. My partner was breastfeeding our daughter, often looking down at the TV while I played video games or just glancing down at her phone and whatnot. She'd been positioned in the same way I was when I had seen the shadows a week prior, and was facing perpendicular to her towards the television. And she said, "Babe?" with a sort of surprised look on her face. "I just saw the tip of a white dress go into the bathroom." These words made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I began to feel fearful this time. She'd seen the frightened look on my face, and I turned to ask her if she was sure. "Yeah, don't be afraid though. If it was here to hurt us, I would probably feel scared too. Just a light smudge, I think," she told me. My partner and I are both First Nations, and because of this, the cultural teachings and beliefs we've both grown up with, we're both very aware of the existence of spirits or ghosts and how best to deal with them. My partner definitely has more paranormal or spiritual experiences than me, though. Smudging is simply the burning of sage, and we've used it every time that we've experienced any of these phenomena, as we believe it's a spiritual medicine that provides protection and cleansing against any negative energy or entities. But anyway, around our maybe 4th month of living in this apartment, my partner and I began experiencing objects being sort of moved outside of our view and hearing unexplainable sounds. The first time this happened was when we heard the scuffling of shoes and a sort of high heel being dropped around the corner by the front door. This happened late at night again, probably around midnight, and immediately I honestly thought someone had entered our apartment, so I opened my pocket knife and whipped around the corner quickly, but when I did, there was nothing there but the high heel in the middle of the doorway, which had originally been placed on the shoe rack, neatly with all the other ones. My partner and I smudged, and we went back to bed once again, as we weren't interested in experiencing any further events as such that evening. But we distinctly remember that we began to feel watched nightly after that, and felt a presence around us often. My partner and I reached out to family members asking what we should do, and they suggested feasting whichever entity is occupying our home. In our culture, feasting spirits is part of our responsibilities, and when they make their presence known like this, it usually means it's time to feast them again. I prepared some food, my partner and I prayed for it, we placed it in a sort of small wooden dish and left it out in the apartment. But from the beginning of the 4th month to the middle of it, we began experiencing paranormal events almost daily. A week ago, my partner had heard our rocking chair in the living room knocking against the wall, and 2 days ago she heard the cardboard from my daughter's new crib rustling in a way that didn't sound like it could have done it by itself. Although we were both long overdue to feast, doing so didn't seem to alleviate the events that we'd been experiencing in our apartment. And the feelings of uneasiness during nighttime grew into a sort of moderate anxiety for me as well. On a few occasions, my daughter, who was 4.5 months old, would suddenly wake up screaming bloody murder. Sometimes, too, we would leave her to play with a toy in her swing while we would do some dishes down the hall. And on a few occasions, she'd begin screaming like the few times she did when waking up. It's also within our beliefs, too, that because infants are new to this physical world, their perceptions are still closely intertwined with the spiritual world, so we grew concerned with the idea that she might be seeing this thing that is occupying our apartment. Last night at around 3 a.m. though, we'd all been sleeping in the bedrooms at the end of the hall, and in the next room over, my laptop began playing a YouTube video on full volume. It was loud enough too to wake us both up, and I knew that I'd been watching YouTube videos prior to closing the laptop and going to bed, but I've never recalled a time where my laptop, or any laptop for that matter, began playing any media while closed. I didn't even have the volume on full blast either, so it was really strange. And all of this is definitely the most paranormal activity that I've ever experienced in my entire life anywhere. And even for my partner too, I can sense that this is becoming tiring and frightening for her. I'll admit that on one hand we feel that because of the stresses and isolation of this pandemic, maybe our negative emotions and energies are attracting entities of ill intent. On the other hand, we feel that maybe other residents within the building are bringing these entities here too. Regardless though, any reasoning as to why this might be happening is just speculation, and we'll probably never know exactly why it's all going down. At this point, I'm really not sure what to do because, well, we can't really move and, well, we don't really understand why all this stuff is still here and what's really going on, but if any of you guys have any ideas about what we could do next, then I'm all ears. Once when I was 6 or 7, I was trick-or-treating with my cousin, who was 12 at the time. It was getting late, and we decided to just hit one more last street, and then we'd call it quits. The first house was done, and there were only 4 that were still up and handing out candy. We split up to cover more houses more quickly, and I went up the road, got my candy from the 2 houses that I was assigned by my cousin for, and I go back to meet her. I go to where our rendezvous point was, and she's not there. So I just decide to go to the 2 houses that she went to. I got to the first one, and I knock, and a handsome 25 to 30-year-old man answers and asks me if I want to come in to get my candy. And I'm about to agree when my cousin wails like a bat out of hell and comes out of that room that was just around the corner of that front door. She shoves the guy into the wall, grabs me, and bolts out of the house as quickly as she can. I'm screaming because I dropped my candy bag, and she's crying a little. Our house wasn't far from that point, and when we get home, she was just in absolute hysterics, blubbering to my mum and her sister about what had happened. I didn't get it then, but a couple of years later, my mum explained that my cousin had refused to go in to get the candy, and he hit her in the head and actually dragged her into the house, half unconscious. When I got to the door, she heard my voice and came to enough to get up and get the heck out of there. And apparently, my mum called the police, and upon searching the man's house, they found emails on his computer that were linked to a human trafficking ring. It chills me to my bones to this day to think about what would have happened if I had just waited for her to come instead of going to that man's house like I did. This cousin is actually in therapy because of PTSD from that incident now, and that was the last time that she ever went trick-or-treating.
G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give HelloFresh a huge shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, with HelloFresh, you get fresh, pre-measured ingredients and mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make cooking easy, fun, and affordable. And that's why it's America's #1 meal kit. HelloFresh cuts out stressful meal planning and grocery store trips, so you can enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in about 30 minutes or less. And their fresh ingredients are sourced directly from the growers and delivered from the farm to your front door in under a week. Contact-free, of course. HelloFresh is also 28% cheaper than shopping at your local grocery store, and 72% cheaper than a restaurant meal without sacrificing the quality. But one particular recipe I personally enjoyed too were the garlic and oregano halloumi tacos with lemon aioli and caramelized onion. I know, it seems like a bit of a weird combo, but man, were they tasty. So, enjoy America's #1 meal kit today and go to hellofresh.com/BeScared12 and use code BeScared12 for 12 free meals including free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/BeScared12 and use code BeScared12 for 12 free meals including free shipping.
So I was on a job where I had to drive site to site and do small upgrades to the shelving at every CVS pharmacy in California. I'm about a month into the contract and I've got over a 100-mile drive through the redwoods to my next location. As I'm driving, I notice that I have a smell, a slight funk on myself. If I can smell it too, it will be 100 times worse to the client. Which means that I'll need to figure out how to get to a shower and change clothes before arriving at the next location. I'm about 40 miles deep on this isolated stretch of highway through the redwoods when I see a sign for a camp at the next exit. I take the turn off to see if they have a shower. I pull into this really small camp that was about 15 spots all tied together in a circle. It's an awful camp, but it's deserted and they have a shower. Perfect. I grab a towel and a change of clothes and I head to the bath building. As I approach, I can hear water running and I get to the building and there's someone in one of the stalls taking a shower. This is really weird. I mean, the camp is deserted, no cars, no tents. It's the middle of winter and we're miles and miles from civilization. So who in the world could be in there? It's got to be a pot farmer, right? Maybe a homeless dude? Are there meth labs in the redwoods? I'm not quite spooked by it, but my instincts are telling me that this is very weird. I decide to go ahead and use one of the showers a few stalls down from him. I'm comforted that the doors are thick metal with a big strong bolt lock. The shower runs on quarters. Nice, California. I take off my clothes and I slide some quarters into the slot and the water immediately turns on. A second later, I hear whoever this person is just yell out weird sounds and profanities, and I must have stolen his hot water or something. I feel awful, but I can't shut it off now. The water instantly runs when the quarters go in. Nothing I can do, so uneasily I step under the water, wondering what's going through the other guy's head. I don't have to wait long to find out, though. I'm about maybe a minute into my shower when there's a huge bang. There's a smash against my metal shower door, followed by him screaming, and then more banging. This dude is trying to kick down my door at this point. I'm petrified. I get out of the shower and I stand by the door dripping wet, naked, with my fists up in case he gets in. It's hard to put into words just how uncomfortable I felt about the concept of fighting naked. I kept thinking to myself that I should try to put my pants on real quick, but just couldn't bring myself to do it because if the door gave while my pants were around my ankles, I would get absolutely destroyed. I also thought about the implications of fighting someone miles and miles from the next human being. I mean, what are the stakes, right? I've been in more than a handful of bar fights and even enjoyed boxing with my friends, but there was never any real danger. If someone was getting hurt, everyone breaks it up. Is this guy going to stop fighting if he wins? Is this to the death? In my mind. I'm so scared that I'm near panicking now, but I try to control my breathing and give myself the best possible chance at coming out of this. After what felt like an eternity of him trying to get in, even though it was probably only a minute or two, he stops screaming and banging, and I call out to him. Hey, man, I'm really sorry. I'll give you some more quarters, okay? There's no answer. I wait a few more minutes and finally relax a little. He must have got his wits about him. I resume my shower thinking about how weird this is and wondering if he'll be waiting for me. But then I remembered my truck. I've got a few grand worth of tools in there. I literally can't afford to lose them, and I'm sure that he's in it now. So, soaking wet, I jump out of the shower, throw on my pants, slam open my stall door, and go running out towards my vehicle. As I turn the corner of the building towards the parking area at full sprint, man, am I so relieved to see that he's nowhere around. Which means that he must have slinked back to wherever he hides, out there in the wilderness. I currently work at a restaurant somewhere in the Midwest. Obviously, I can't say what restaurant, but it's on a pretty busy road with lots of cars and lots of people walking on the road to get to the bus stop or whatever their destination may be. It's got its own parking lot where I usually will park closer to the doors, but the story I'm about to tell is the one time that I didn't. That night, I sincerely regret my actions. So, to give some backstory, a couple of years ago, I just so happened to work at the sports bar and grill directly across the parking lot from my current job. I worked there for just 4 months, and I have plenty of interesting stories about that place, but that's for another time. Anyways, while I worked at my previous job, I didn't have a car, so I either walked to and from work or I got a ride. Now, mind you, I would walk home at around 10 some nights on a barely lit road when cars weren't always around. This naturally made me feel wary, and this was on the top of the fact that older men would constantly hit on me as a minor and make me feel watched. And this backstory of my old job might not seem that important at the moment, and I didn't think it would ever become relevant again, but it matters in the end, I promise. While working at my old job, I was a minor, as previously stated, but that never stopped drunken men from approaching me and being inappropriate. There was one man in particular who I never forgot about, and who came back to haunt me in just the worst way. The man was taller, quite good looking, and always wore expensive looking clothing and accessories. He had a very elegant vibe to him, which is why I didn't think much of him when he would talk to me while I was working. He started out very polite, in fact. He'd ask about how work was going, how my day was, stuff like that. But as the weeks went on, he would ask more and more personal questions, which started making me suspicious of him. But the event that occurred right before I quit was a night that I wish that I could forget when thinking back on my days at that sports bar. I remember it being a long night, probably because it was a sports season and our restaurant would get very busy around that time. And as a hostess, it was really stressful trying to take calls when there was shouting because the hockey team was a Golden Cup or whatnot. That night, after I had finished cleaning the bathrooms, I remember him being at the hostess stand waiting for me. I approached him and tried to make polite conversation, but I could tell immediately that he was acting strange. His gaze was shifty and he didn't look as put together as he normally did. The first thing that he said to me was something along the lines of, "You're only 16, right?" To which I confirmed, And he continued with something like, "Well, when you're 18, I'll have something for you. It'll be a surprise. Just wait till you're 18. And he promptly left the bar section of the grill. I stood there shocked for a moment before composing myself and finishing my cleaning so I could just get the heck out of there. After I finished counting my drawdown, I went out back and unlocked the bike that I'd gotten a month or so after I'd started working there and began to ride home. Note that I was paranoid as heck as I was doing this because seriously, who says something like that to an underage girl? I watched my back all night as I rode home and felt watched the entire time. It was kind of my fault that he knew my age. I had told him a long time ago as I mentioned something about birthday plans, I think. But his comment on my age just made me feel sick to my stomach regardless. Now, let's jump to more recently when I started my new job just across the parking lot. It's been years since I've worked there and I had just about let go of the memories of working in that terrible place. But something happened recently that made the memories just feel like yesterday. You see, the stimulus checks and nice weather have brought a surge of customers to my current restaurant. I've worked here for almost a year now, and we've been busier in the past month than we have since I even first started. This means that occasionally I don't get to park right by the doors, and I must park a bit further away. On this particular day, that still makes me feel nervous thinking about, I had to park basically at the farthest corner of a sort of lot due to a large amount of staff and customers taking the closest spots. That day, I thought nothing of it as I went in for my closing shift and worked a long and stressful shift until about 10 p.m. I work at the front of the restaurant and our closing duties can be pretty grueling. So that night was especially bad because I was the only one up front beside the manager, who has to go back and forth between the kitchen and the front to help. So I finished all of my cleaning, albeit a bit later than usual, and felt bad for taking so long, but they weren't too upset because a co-worker of mine was waiting on a ride, so they had to wait anyways. So with that, I say my goodbyes to the two of them and head out the back doors to my car. I immediately was irritated that I had to walk so far to get to my car, and I started digging for my keys. And somewhere in all of that, I didn't realize that there was a third car in our parking lot, until it was almost too late, in fact. I finally grabbed my keys after a moment of struggling to find them and realized that the third car is, in fact, not my manager, and it was also parked right next to mine, although it did look similar, which is why I didn't think much of it at first, being exhausted from work and all. Upon getting closer, I realized that there's a person inside. So I remember thinking, is my co-worker's ride here or something? But no one came out to go home, so I assumed not. I looked back closer to the restaurant and realized that the front of the building, where I couldn't see before as I left out the back, my manager's car was sitting empty right up front. All of these thoughts were beginning to piece together as I slowly trailed to my car, and after connecting the dots, I tried to see who was in the car waiting for me. I remember squinting at them. I didn't have my glasses on, and that's probably what made them realize that I'd actually noticed them, and with that, they turned on their car. Immediately, I looked away because the car lights were way too bright, and when I tried to look back again, the cabin light was turned on. And I stopped dead in my tracks, as if paralyzed. Even sharing this makes me feel terrible, but the expression that this man was wearing invoked so much fear that I think my heart quite literally skipped a beat. The man's features were a bit blurry with the distance and darkness, but I could tell that he knew me from somewhere with that little overhead light illuminating his face. But truly, it was the lack of facial expression is what really made me scared, because I figured that he would smile, frown, wave, or something, anything. But instead, he sat there, arms at his sides, as he waited for me to edge closer. Now, as a young woman, I should know better than to ignore my instincts telling me to get out of that situation, but for a split second, I almost felt compelled to continue towards my car. I can't explain why, but I distinctly recall taking one step forwards before pausing. asking myself, what am I doing? And then hightailing it back to the back door. I felt like I was prey about to be eaten, the way that I sensed this overwhelming presence behind me. The whole time I debated going back and then running to safety, and he just sat right in his seat and didn't even seem to move an inch. Or so I assume, as I didn't look back too much until I actually reached the door. I did glance back at his car for a split second before dashing inside, and all I remember seeing was his cabin light had turned off and I could only see a dark figure now, the menacing light no longer illuminating his face. I didn't need to see his face, though, to know that he was still staring, and I could just feel his beady eyes staring right at me. Well, after scaring the heck out of my co-workers by yanking open the back door as I did, I explained what happened. They both got immediately serious and told me to wait with them while they waited for my other co-worker's ride. Well, we sat for a few minutes and they talked about how freaky the situation was and how they would call the cops if he was still there when we went outside together, but I just sat in silence. I was silent because in the few minutes after the encounter with this strange person, I knew that I recognized him from somewhere. In fact, I knew that he was that same guy who had told me to wait for him when I turned 18. It took me a while because he didn't look like he used to. He looked much more bedraggled, a bit older, and much scarier now. I don't know if he saw me that day as I brought out the trash, or maybe when I walked into work or something, but he knew that I was there somehow, and that thought terrified me. When their ride finally arrived, we all walked out together, and my eyes instantly shot to the area where I knew his car was parked. It was just my car, though, now, waiting for me to climb inside and get home ASAP. The manager saw my co-worker off into their parents' car and walked me to mine. She helped me to check under my car and inside, as apparently she had dealt with a stalker before and knew all of the tricks to stay safe, and I thanked her profusely, got in, locking my doors right away. I watched her as she walked to her car and started to leave the lot. I looked frantically to see if I could spot his car anywhere in the shopping area that connected with our parking lots, but in the end I found nothing. I live close by my work, so I took a long way home that night, fearing that he was waiting for me to go home and do something sinister. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night, as I kept thinking that he was in the darkest corner of my room with that hollow expression on his face. I considered making a police report, but seeing as the police tend to be pretty useless in scenarios like this, and I literally only had a first name, which also could have been fake, I decided against it. In the weeks since then, I haven't seen him or heard from him. I still think about him every time that I leave the building, half expecting him to be either standing outside ready to snatch me or parked right next to my car. I always leave with my co-workers now, though, as my parents insisted that I begin doing that after I told them about what happened. To this day, I still wonder why he remembered that I was 18, almost 19 now, but he didn't know exactly when my birthday was. Surely not. Although, he did show up around when I was 18. But I had almost completely forgotten about him. I hope that I never do find out what surprise he had waiting for me, that's for sure. And all in all, I most definitely think that I've earned the right to say that I never want to see this guy ever again. So this happened a few years ago when I was about 13. I'm 5'7" and about 125 pounds, so I'm pretty small, but I usually have pepper spray and a pocket knife on me. I'm embarrassed to say, though, that in the excitement of my exploration with my best friends, that I forgot my pepper spray and knife this day. I love to explore, though, and even travel, or especially in places that I'm not allowed to. So when I moved in, of course, one of the first places that I explored were the train tracks. I had my best friend come over one day to explore the neighborhood with me, and we decided that the train tracks was a perfect place to start. We were walking for an hour or two, but it was still light outside, and we had just passed a small neighborhood street, so we felt pretty safe. But when I turned around to throw a stick, I saw 5 hooded figures suddenly following us from about 200 feet. I tried to pretend that I didn't see them, and I told my best friend calmly what I'd seen. We decided to look at them straight on and to see what they would do. But once we looked at them, they stopped. So did my friend and I. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Finally, they made their move, and 3 of them went left and 2 of them went right. But we heard the sound of loud and fast footsteps, so we finally snapped out of our trance and we ran as quickly as we could. We were both in cross-country teams, thankfully, and we were being held together by adrenaline, so we could run faster than we ever had before. And luckily, too, because I'd actually explored some of these tracks alone a few days ago, I knew that if we ran about a half a mile more, that we would be on a bridge above another small neighborhood. We somehow made it too, no clue if we were still being followed or not, but out of fear we jumped 10 feet down and just kept running deep into the neighborhood until we finally saw other people. And then we slowly walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back on it all now, I really do regret not telling my parents about this. But I was scared that they wouldn't let me go out and explore alone anymore. I didn't go on those tracks again, and I never will, but still, I probably should have told someone because, who knows, maybe somebody else will end up down there, and maybe they won't be so quick. When I say my grandfather was truly a badass, I really mean it. He was born in Alberta during the early 30s and raised his 3 brothers on a reservation from the time that he was like 9, when his parents left for BC with their only daughter, promising to return, and none of the boys ever saw them again. To make ends meet, he learned carpentry and worked as a labourer, and bare-knuckle boxed against older men for extra cash from time to time. He learned how to track and hunt, and always came home with something to eat when the work was scarce. When he was 14, he put the second oldest brother in charge of the household, left the res in search of his parents and a better life, and just never went back. And that was the last time that he saw any of his family members ever again. He spent several months riding the rails, though, befriending some transients while using his fighting skills to defend himself against others. He eventually made his way to Vancouver, the last known whereabouts of his parents and sister, and started working in a pulp mill. At 17, he met my grandmother, and the two eventually married, leading to him giving up his search for his family. They bought some land, and he spent his free time building several houses, which still stand today. And one of those houses sat on the land that he bought with my grandmother, which included acres of wooded area. On this land, my grandparents kept horses and dogs and small farm animals for eggs and meat and whatnot. When my aunt was born in the early 50s, and then my mother came along right before the end of the decade. As far as I've heard too, nothing bad or strange really ever happened until my mum found an old Ouija board and played with it by herself, but I don't know if it has any relation to this story or whatnot, but it's always mentioned. But my mother was around 8 when she was riding a horse through the wooded part of their acreage, when the horse just stopped, dead in its tracks. Well, my mum tried to spur it on, but it seemed to be frozen in fear, and all of a sudden she smelled something like rotting garbage and meat. She pulled back on the reins, and the horse instantly turned and took off backwards towards the house, almost knocking her off its back several times along the way. Afterwards, too, that horse was just never really the same. It would try to kick her, and if she got on it, it would fall backwards, trying to crush her beneath it. On one occasion, it started acting like its old self again, letting her climb onto it, but once she did, it just ran towards the road and stopped abruptly, bucking her forward onto the path and an oncoming car. My grandpa actually saw this one happen and even put a shotgun to its head, and the horse just kept breathing heavily and staring straight ahead. My mother barely missed being run over by a car that day that saw the horse coming and managed to swerve out of the way in the last instance, and my grandmother begged my grandfather not to shoot the horse, but he finally decided to give it away when he saw my mother wasn't badly injured. And that same horse fell on the next person to ride it, breaking a collarbone, and the father did what my grandpa said that he should have done the first time. But after that, animals started going missing, and one of the hunting dogs was injured by something during an attack at night. My grandpa set out some traps and stayed in the hayloft above the barn with a shotgun and a rifle beside him, and slept out there for several nights at one point. He figured that it was foxes, or maybe coyotes, or wolves, or even a desperate bear perhaps, which is what he attributed the smell in the woods to and the horse's reason for losing its mind. But nothing ever came the entire night that he slept out there, and eventually he just figured that it had moved on to easier prey or perhaps even died. But the day after he stopped sleeping in the barn, my mum was out near the tree line playing with the injured dog as it was healing, when out of nowhere, the dog started sniffing the air, and then positioned itself between my mum and the trees, growling and barking. My grandpa heard the noise and came out, stopped in his tracks, and called to my grandmother to bring his rifle, then whistled for the dogs. My grandma came out, handed him his gun, then asked what was going on. As the dogs all started to react like the first one, my grandfather pointed to one of the treetops, which looked longer and thicker than those around it, but it was very slightly moving. It was at least 6 feet tall, but he told me later on when he would retell the story that it was probably a good bit taller than that too. But he took aim and fired just as he saw a pair of wings start to open up. Whatever was up there was watching them, but he beat it to the punch. It was a kill shot, directly in the chest with a high-powered rifle, and he instantly started running forward with all of the dogs following him as this thing plummeted to the ground. The breaking of tree branches was wholly unmistakable too, he said. When he reached the impact point, he raised his rifle again and commanded the dogs forward to flush it out, but they all just sort of stood on the spot and kept spinning around, trying to catch a scent that just seemingly disappeared. A pile of broken branches lay in the obvious landing spot, but beyond that, there was no proof that anything had happened. There was no body, no blood, no trail, which meant that it had either disappeared or gone straight back up the way that it came. He searched those woods too for several days, but just never found a sign of what that thing was. They didn't see it or experience issues with the animals after that, though, which I guess sort of lends credence to the fact that this thing was the thing bothering them. Decades later, though, when he was dying, he kept talking about how he saw something. In his delirium, he referred to it as an alien, but said that it was coming back for him. Now, I have never seen that man scared of pretty much anything in my entire life, but there was actual panic and fear in his voice this time. A few nights before he died, he had already been too weak to stand on his own for several days, and my grandmother woke up to the sound of a gunshot. She ran outside, fearing the worst, and saw my grandpa lowering his rifle, staring at something in the distance. She took the gun away and helped him back inside, and that was it. I don't know if whatever it was actually did come back for him, or if it was just a hallucination of an old memory or something. But I would like to think that he went out with a final screw you to the thing that tried to torment his family all those years ago. So to lay the scene, I live in a small town in Florida, very close to the coast. It's a bit of a commuter town, and it's usually pretty quiet at night. But since the state shut down, people have been so eager to get home and just go to bed so they can get to work in the morning. But I work in service and still work just as much as I did, if not more, before this all happened. I see a lot more people out at night, having parties or driving around at weird hours or just walking the town and whatnot. And one night, my dad picked me up from my closing shift, but we decided to take the back road because it's quicker. It's still fairly inhabited, with houses and a church and a high school on the way, but it is poorly lit. And to be honest, it was actually a pretty uneventful ride. We were just talking as usual, catching up on how our day was and whatnot, until we made the final turn onto a stretch of road beside the church, and in the middle of the road was what I can only describe as a creature. Physically, it was huge and covered in thick dark fur. For reference on the size, my dad drives a 2005 Dodge Ram, and the headlights just reached its shoulders. But it had 6 really skinny legs, and it was sort of hunched over and dragging one of them behind it. And they curved sort of outward, which made me wonder if they were supposed to, or if they were severely bowed or something. I really can't logically think of any animal it could have been, to be honest, unless it was mutated or had been born deformed or something. But the sounds it made were just unlike anything that I've ever heard. When our headlights hit it, it sort of sunk to the ground, screamed, and then just ran off into the woods. But the screams were high-pitched and really wet, like it was gargling. I saw it stumble off the road and hit a tree before screaming again, and then it just disappeared. My dad stopped the truck and we got out with a flashlight. We only stayed for a few minutes as we were both pretty shaken up, but we looked for blood or tracks, but there were none. But what I do remember is that the whole section of the road in front of our truck was covered in what looked like white sand, and even though we are close to the beach, it's pretty much all woods around that area. We got back into the truck after that, though, and we just went home. My dad just refuses to talk about it, and we don't actually take that back road anymore after that. But I guess the reason why I'm sharing this here is because I would like to know, do many of you guys know what the heck that was? So one night, my wife, my son and I, we went to stay over at my wife's parents' house. It had gotten dark, and my son, about 2 at the time, had actually gotten sleepy, so I decided to put him to bed. Now, let me try to explain the room to you as well, because it's pretty relevant for later. So the door opens on the right side of the room. Immediately to your left is the light switch, and the queen-size bed is just beside that. It's a pretty small room, just big enough for the bed, in fact, and enough room to walk around that bed. The wall in front of the bed has a window, and to the left of the bed is a closet with those weird sort of accordion doors. So I'm laying in bed with the lights out with my son, who is laying his head on my arm. He finally falls asleep, and I'm just sort of lying there for a few minutes to make sure that he's completely out. When out of nowhere, I just get this horrible feeling. Goosebumps, hair standing up on the back of my neck and arms. It was just such an evil feeling. Have you ever got goosebumps up your scalp where it feels like your scalp is sort of shrinking? Well, I did that night. It was so bad, in fact, that it literally felt like someone had a hand on my head squeezing it. I was genuinely scared, and not so much for me, but for my son. And somehow I just knew deep down that if I turned away from my son, that something bad was about to happen to him. I thought that if I could turn on the light, I could grab my son and leave the room. So, where I was in the bed, I could just barely touch the plastic bezel thing on the light switch. I was afraid to move because I knew that if I did, whatever this thing is, it will get my son. His head was on my arm this whole time, though. So I finally chanced it. I jerked my arm out from under my son and I turned on the light quickly. It honestly took just a split second, but when I turned back to grab him, he was now at the bottom of the mattress, like something had pulled him from the top to the bottom in like a split second. And I know that he didn't crawl down there because, well, he was still fast asleep and there's just no way that he could move that quickly. So I grabbed him up and we left that room and just slept in the front room that night. But something evil wanted my child, and that truly terrifies me. This was a few months ago, and quarantine was already in place, so I spent a lot more time at home and around the home than usual. There's a park very close to my house, so one day I decided to go for a little jog, just to get out and get some fresh air. I ran from my house into the park, and since I don't have the best fitness, I decided to take a little break. I noticed that a guy was looking my way, but I didn't think too much of it, until I started jogging again, and he started walking at the same time. Since I was jogging, I eventually lost him, so I thought that that was that. But, man, was I wrong. So, it's been a few hours, and I'm sleeping, when, through the window, I noticed car lights coming back and forth on my street. The window in my room gives a view of my street. Now, I know that some people may think that this is normal, but I live in a very quiet neighborhood, so I wanted to see what was going on. And as I thought, there was a car that was traveling back and forth on my street. Then, the car stops right in front of my house, and that same guy comes out of the passenger seat, which means that there's at least one other person with him. Up until this point, I was still half awake, but the sight of that same guy looking up to my window, seeing me and smiling, that woke me up real quick. I immediately closed the blinds, which are a tiny bit see-through by the way, and I climb in my bed and phone in my hand. After waiting for some time and now thinking that I was stupid, I fell asleep again, only to be woken up by light tapping on my window. Now, remember when I said that my blinds are see-through pretty much? Well, I could make out the silhouette of a man, probably the same guy since there were still car lights in the street, and he was now crouched at my window, tapping from outside. The first thing that came to my mind is not to move and to try to pretend that I'm still asleep, not knowing if he could actually see inside my room or not. And then I remember that my room is on the second floor. So how the heck did he climb onto the little roof area outside of my window? I had absolutely no idea, but I knew that going down was not going to be easy. I slowly pulled the covers over my head and I called the police, whispering and telling them that the guy was still tapping. They told me to slowly get out of reach of the window in case he breaks in or something, and that they would be there in about 5 minutes. I crawled out of bed and into the bathroom where I could see the street behind my house and waited. After a couple of minutes, I heard the knocking stop, then silence, and then a big thump. Then more silence, and a knocking at my door downstairs. I was still on the phone with the operator when I heard someone call out that it was the police and that the guy was gone. I told the operator that the police had thankfully arrived, and she told me to wait. There was silence, and she said that the police had not arrived yet, and to not open the door under any circumstances. Soon enough, she tells me that the police are now there, and that I can now go and open the door. I go and check outside of my bedroom window just out of paranoia, and there were in fact 3 police cars and about 5 or 6 officers outside of my house. I go downstairs as one of them is knocking, and I open the door, thank the operator, and hang up. I tell them the whole thing, and they tell me that the guy was already gone when they arrived, but that there was no one there anymore. In the next few days, I saw officers on my street, but I never got any news from the guys. The only thing that they apparently found was a rope and a small knife. No fingerprints, no car, no guy, nothing. Lately, I've been noticing something off about my home. Like, there's something else there with me, my wife, and our 2 dogs. But I haven't been able to put my finger on it. Until today, that is. So, for some context, I live in a duplex. We share the property with another guy in his mid-20s. He has his own house, and we have ours, obviously, but we share the laundry room that leads to our respective backyards that are separated by a fence. So, this all started around maybe 2 months ago when the guy sent me a text. It read, "Hey man, just a heads up, someone stole my bike out of the sunroom." This is extra creepy too, because to get to our sunroom or laundry room, you would need to hop the brick fence surrounded by shrubby trees and then hurl the bike over. Unless the thief had the most massive pair of balls ever and walked out through one of the front doors when we weren't home or something. Either way, I didn't feel right and made more of an effort to keep the door locked. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, I let my dogs into the backyard and one of them starts sniffing at the shed. No big deal, the lizards are coming out with the heating up and everything like that. They probably just chased one under the door, right? I finally got them to come in, but didn't give it much thought, and I hardly ever go into that shed anyway. Nothing wrong with it, it's just kind of out of the way, I guess, and I'm not really a hang out in the shed type of guy, if you catch my drift. So, we generally use it for storage, but there's really only suitcases, furniture that doesn't fit or match the house, some camping stuff, I think. Just boring suburban stuff. We probably enter it maybe 3 times a year at most. But after the 18th day in a row of my dogs being curious about the shed, I decided to have a little bit of a look-see to see if maybe there was a Komodo dragon or something in there, since they wouldn't let this thing go. But no Komodo. But what I did find literally scared me half to death. Inside the shed was the bike that my neighbor had stolen a little while back. My first thought was, oh man, my wife is a klepto, but quickly ruled that out. She doesn't even like to bike. Then I was briefly worried that my neighbor thought that I was the thief. I mean, it's in my shed after all. And to be honest, I have no idea how to explain that if he found out. Plus, I wanted to give him his bike back. I kept looking around and found one of our sleeping bags unraveled, but balled up behind a box. Inside of it was what looked like a sack to be around $20 and change in singles. There was also a bag for garbage and had a lot of food wrappers inside. And eventually my brain accepted what it was ultimately denying at first and put 2 and 2 together. Someone, and I don't know who, is living in my shed. Or at least was. Maybe my dog spooked them off, or maybe they sleep around there every other night or something and leave during the day. If they weren't coming back, why would they leave the change like that though? I ended up leaving everything how I found it and thinking about what I should do next. Whoever did it must have gotten in there through the spare set of keys that I keep hidden in my backyard. I locked up though and brought them inside with me tonight, and hopefully whoever it is gets the message and moves on. I'm going to install some cameras tomorrow as well, and I'll keep you guys updated if anything else happens. Please hope for the best and that this person isn't some crazy lunatic who is going to murder me in my sleep. I may seem out of my mind here. I feel like I am, but I'm going to share this anyway. So, the first night that I heard it was the end of summer of 2019. I was building my own art studio in the back of this old building, and one night I stepped out onto the back deck to clean up. I was staring off into the woods that ran right up next to the stairs leading up to my studio when I heard something let loose this immense deep howling off in the distance. It had such a blood-curdling effect on the air around me that it gave me goosebumps and raised every hair on my body. And shortly after it just went silent. Then I heard all of the dogs in like a 1 or 2 mile radius barking and yipping and howling in the direction of whatever that was. There was no way that it was a wolf or any sort of a large cat. I've heard videos and sound bites of wild cats, mountain cats making those demonic type sounds, and that was not this. This was a roar of some kind. Almost sounded human too, but mixed with like an animal of some sort. I could hear it in its voice. The area of Ohio that I'm in isn't a place where you would actually see any really large cats, let alone hear any really. So I don't know why this popped into my head, but I just thought to myself that it sounds like a Wendigo. And countless of other number of things have been happening more and more lately. Almost like intuition or something in my head. I don't know. Anyway, 4 weeks prior to the weirdest thing that I've ever experienced, I was approached by a man about commissioning 3 art pieces of something that I wasn't really familiar with at all. Wendigos. And more specifically, a wartime Wendigo, where it's this huge 1,000-foot tall creature, taller than a building or a skyscraper, and it's made out of all of us, body parts sticking out all over it, a face here and there, and it was supposed to represent all of our greed and insatiable desire or something like that. Sadly, I didn't have the time to work on these pieces, so I had to pass them up. But it started reminding me of my own sort of monster that's been following me my whole life. I made some drawings of night terrors that I had a week before this man approached me to turn us into the Wendigo, and so yeah, I've always had night terrors and weird dreams like that. In my dream, it was a tall, emaciated creature with animal-like body features, legs, and human-like arms crouching in my kitchen like a dog would sit, looking in my cabinets. I asked it, "Well, what are you doing?" And it said, "Chill out, I'm looking for some chips or something, I'm starving." I know, a bit weird, but I sat up quickly and threw the blanket off of me because that last bit, I actually said it out loud. And it was at this point that I noticed something in my room. It was in the corner. It turned to look at me, and the way it looked was, well, very hard to describe, but I tried to take in every detail that I could. It had large black holes where the eyes were supposed to be, and just a jagged slit across the lower side of its face that represented a mouth with no lips, I think. It had a sort of long tongue sliding out between them, and it let out a sort of gurgled, squelching sort of noise, maybe like a scream. Then all of a sudden there was like these black, smoky, tendril-looking things shooting out of it, where its hair was supposed to be on its head. It lingered for a second, and then it just sort of sucked back in towards its body, and then it just vanished. I sat there dumbfounded, trying to figure out if that was actually real or if it was just sleep paralysis or something. Eventually, I just got up and I didn't sleep much that night. I made drawings of it and was trying to put all the pieces together as to why it was in our kitchen of all places in my dream. And then every hair on my body stood on end because I had an unanswered email still about commissioning some artwork based on it. Anyway, I know it's all very strange and convoluted and a bit confusing, but all of that was to talk about this next thing that happened. So fast forward to June 2020. The world is now in lockdown, and I'm sure that I'm about to lose my mind. I forgot about all of this and am hanging out with a friend, 3 a.m, just after months of not seeing or talking to anyone, it seemed. But we went out to White Castle for a quick bit. She walks out first and hits the bottom step, and as I'm walking out and locking the door, I hear something breaking tree limbs, crashing through them. Not fast too, but slow and definitely noticeable. And it was coming from up high and gradually getting louder as it neared us and as it got lower. It reminded me of an orangutan or a gorilla maybe, the way it swung from each branch, and I could hear its hands gripping each one and snapping smaller limbs in its way. And unfortunately, it seemed to be coming in our direction. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I'm crazy, until she turned around quickly and was looking up high in the trees. She asked me, "Did you hear that?" And at that, I turned white and had felt the air get very heavy all of a sudden from the fear that was emanating from this whole situation. I came down the stairs and she's staring into the trees looking upwards. I glanced and see the branches moving. I yelled at her to get out of here quickly, pulling her towards the direction of the car. We turned our backs to the woods when this loud sort of whacking sound. It landed just behind me and all of the hairs on my body stood straight up. I felt like it had a log or maybe a large thick branch in its hand or something, and it smacked the ground with it. In any case, I stood paralyzed for a moment with fear. The air was now thicker and different from whatever it was, landing directly behind me. I could feel the air force of it too, and it almost brought tears to my eyes because it was the weirdest feeling to have come over me, and it just felt like it was crushing every inch of my body without even touching me. And it actually hurt a little bit. It made me shake uncontrollably as well, and the fear it made me feel was just too much to bear. Hands down, it was one of the most terrifying things that's ever happened to me, and I couldn't really shake it, but eventually we got in the car and we took off. We went to White Castles like we said we were going to, and we were both just shook. I was in disbelief at what we had just witnessed, and we came back and turned the brights on in her car and let them light up the woods for a good 20 minutes before we felt like it was safe to go back inside. The only weapon that I had in sight, too, was a golf club, and when I picked it up, she told me that she had actually seen it, high in the trees, and that apparently it looked almost like an owl, sort of, with weird features. I've put a lot of pieces together in this story so far, and a few weeks later something else happened at a friend's house one night when we were playing music together. It's something that's made me vow to never step foot in the woods anywhere ever again, but I'll save that part for another time. I just wanted to get some feedback on this particular part of the story, as I've been talking to countless others about their experiences with the woods where they live at and stuff, and reading so many things about all these strange cases. I would like to get your opinion on what you might think all of this is, but anyway, thanks for listening to my story. It's really helped me out. So me and my wife have started to rebuild our relationship after a few weeks of separation due to my temporary job and our son. He's 5. And well, we bought a house that's fairly old because, well, it was nice, cheap, and also near both of our families and jobs. We've had several weird things happen in that house, but kind of just laugh about it now. And so we were just hanging out in the living room when our son just casually turned around at us and asked whose grandpa that was lying in our bed. Me and my wife just sort of looked at each other like, what the... and then looked back at him and asked him to describe what he saw. And he just said that it was an old man, and he asked, "Who are you?" And apparently the old man looked at him and smiled before closing his eyes and going under the covers and disappearing. We immediately got up and pulled out these photographs of some of the men in my family who died, and he said that it wasn't any of them. No one officially died in this house, and the house was empty for a while before we bought it. I asked my neighbor who lived next door for 50-something years and said a while back that there was an older guy who was frequently coming home to visit his daughter and son-in-law who died, but he was black, and my son said that it was a white person. Well, he said the same skin color as him. I'm really confused as to who it could be, but I'm still waiting on my answer at all. I'll make another post about the experiences that we had other times, but the night experience that we had, man, it was terrifying, and it's still bugging me. So, it was July 4th weekend, I remember, because they were still shooting off fireworks outside in the distance when he was in bed and had this massive freakout. He has a little nightlight in his room that pretty much keeps a good amount of light in his room. And well, his room and our room are very close to each other, and me and my wife were just watching TV silently when we heard what sounded like tapping on the window. Well, we thought that it was fireworks, to be honest, and sort of ignored it when we started hearing our son talking, and we both looked at each other, and then we heard, "Who are you?" And then, weirdly enough, "What are you?" And that's when I got up, and I heard the windows opening, and he started screaming, and I ran in and picked him up and brought him downstairs, and my wife then noticed that the window was actually open, and she closed it and followed us, and when he finally calmed down, he asked what was wrong, and he tried telling us, but then kept insisting on drawing it. Basically, what he drew was a black circle, but claimed his eyes were blacker than his whole body and tried tapping on the window to get in. That's how he explained it anyway. After this, we had our priest come and bless the home, but nothing has happened since then that was malicious, in my opinion anyway. But what do you guys think? So I was 10 years old when I met my best friend. We were pretty much inseparable from the beginning. All through school, we were always by each other's side. Our last names both started with J, so we had almost every class together. He was a really smart kid too, a student. As we grew up and sort of became adults, we had different views on what we wanted to do with our lives. He had his first child at 18 years old, split up with the child's mum, so the thought of college never really set well with him. He worked a 9-to-5 job trying to support himself. By 21, he met another woman and had a baby with her. This time he was doing good and stayed with the woman, taking care of his and her other child, and to be honest, I was proud of him. And all of a sudden, something inside him just flipped. It was almost like a switch too, overnight. He left that woman, moved to another state, I think, and I haven't spoke to him in about 2 months after that. All of a sudden, late at night, I get a phone call from his mother saying that he was now in jail. I asked what had happened, and she told me, and it was horrible, and he got caught and sent to jail. He was serving 2 years behind bars, but only because of certain circumstances. 2.5 years later, though, he gets out of jail, and I told him that he can stay with me until he gets on his feet. But he chose not to. He stayed with my mum for about a month, and every day I would go and check up on him. I'd be like, "Hey man, what's going on? How are you?" And the answer I always got was, "I'm good, and thanks for helping me out." He called me at one stage and said that he wanted to end everything, and he also had a knife in his room. I drove down there to talk him down and took the knife away. But later that night, I called him and checked up on him, and there was no answer. I called my mum, and she answered and said that he was in his room, and so I said go and look, but he was nowhere to be found. We found out where he went that night. Apparently, he had walked to his ex-girlfriend's house and also was spying on her and her boyfriend. He walked behind the house and had ripped his shirt off and shoved it in the crack of a window and lit the whole house on fire and walked away. Thankfully, the adults in the house were awake. They smelled the fire, and the children and everyone got out safely and called the fire department. But my best friend, he admitted to everything, and he's been in jail since. I guess it just goes to show that no matter how much you know someone, you never truly know them. And that thought is really terrifying. So I have 2 Australian shepherds. One is my personal dog and the other is a foster dog. Both are roughly 60 pounds, and I took them on a walk today at a local wilderness area that consists of about maybe 50 miles of trails in total. I've been there many times with just my dog and never had any problems. Anyways, we're walking down this trail and they do a bark at a few people that we see. Every time I see someone, though, we step to the side of the trail and let them pass. I apologize for them. The person smiles and just keeps walking, and we all carry on. So, when I see this one guy approaching, the dogs go into alert mode and we step off so that he could pass. He gets up to us and stops and says, "Oh, I don't think your dogs like me." I told him no, that they're just nervous, and I apologize for them being so loud, and at this point I'm holding them by their harnesses, so they're super close to me, but they're just going crazy, like angry barking, lunging and growling, etc., almost trying to bite this guy. I know that that's not great behavior, but nonetheless, he tells me, "I'm sorry that they don't like me, I'm really sorry." At this point I'm weirded out though, because he has not broken eye contact and seems rather unfazed by the dogs. I again tell him that it's okay, it's not his fault. and I tell the dogs, let's go, and begin to guide them away. He then says that he's going to keep moseying up the trail, and I say, all right, and I tell him to have a good day, and we walk off in opposite directions. I thought that it was a strange interaction, but hey, we can all be a little weird sometimes, so I didn't think too much of it. About 2 minutes later, though, I hear him call out from behind me, and I turn around and see him approaching. He says, I just really want to be friends with your dogs. I don't want to leave them on bad terms, and I want to make friends, as he keeps walking up to me. Now, I don't know about other people, but when I come up to nervous dogs, I tend to leave them alone, or if I do try to make friends, I squat down, talk gently to them, and extend a hand, stuff like that. But he never did any of this, and I swear that he never even looked at my dogs because he kept looking at me the whole time. This time the dogs are going absolutely nuts, but I don't grab their harnesses. I let them have the full length of the leash to put some distance between us and the man. He keeps telling me repeatedly that he just wants to be friends, and I tell him that I don't think that that's going to happen, that they're just not there yet. He does try to approach still, but the dogs have none of that. He eventually says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think they're going to be friends with me." But again, he isn't even looking at the dogs. So I tell him, no, they're not, and they won't be letting him get any closer. And at that, he finally turns and leaves, and I call my sister for the remainder of the walk. So, is it annoying that my dogs freak out over the mailman, or the neighbors, or a knocking noise on the TV show? Yeah, it is. But I don't know for a fact that this man today had bad intentions, but I'm really glad that they were there and made it abundantly clear that he was not getting near me. I'll probably work with them on calming down a little quicker, but I have no plans to have them befriend strangers at first sight, especially after all of this. Two years ago, I took my wife, my father and son, then three, to visit family in rural New England, America. They live on a small farm with buildings that date back to the 1700s, which have been restored and modernized, and a guest house which was built about 20 years ago. My cousin is a prolific photographer, and my auntie had decorated most of the rooms in the main house and guest houses with her photos. We didn't notice much about the photos in the guest house when we first arrived, probably because we were all just jet-lagged. But the next morning, after a sound night's sleep, we were sitting in the main family room eating breakfast and making plans for the day when I noticed that my son was keeping his head down and not answering my father whenever he spoke to him, which was unusual because even at that young age, they were very close. I looked over to my dad and noticed that he was sitting in front of a photo of a room in a rundown house. The room had a large window with sunlight streaming in, casting shadows across the length of the room towards a dark corner. I got an uneasy feeling from that photo, but didn't think too much more of it. We finished breakfast and all got up from the table, and I noticed my son was walking in a sort of wide arc around the end of the table where my father had been sitting. Again, weird behavior, but I just dismissed it as a weird 3-year-old thing. Over the next day or so, I noticed him becoming more and more uneasy any time that we were at the dining table and doing whatever he could do to avoid looking at that photo. Eventually, I decided to ask him what was wrong, and he answered me very matter-of-factly, "The bad man in the picture is looking at me. He's very cold and he's not nice." I looked back at the picture and got instant chills down my spine because there was no man in the picture, but I got the feeling that there was more to it than an empty room. I decided to ask my cousin about the picture, and she told me that it was taken at an abandoned farm a bit further upstate. It was one of her favorite pictures, but had always given my aunt the creeps, so it was moved into the guest house. Over the next couple of days, whenever I would ask my son about it, he would say things like, "The bad man is looking at me, he doesn't like me, he wants to hurt me," and I didn't think too much of it until we were going to bed one night, and my son tripped and fell, seemingly for no reason, in the middle of the hall and started crying hysterically. When I asked him if he was okay, he said that the bad man hurt me on the leg. I checked his leg, and sure enough, on the side of his leg there was a large bruise that looked like he had been struck with a blunt object. And there was just no way that falling over like that would have given him a bruise that bad, that quickly. I didn't want to play into his fears or anything, but I asked him how the bad man could hurt him if he was in the photo downstairs near the table. And his answer was enough for me to pack up all of our stuff and move to the main house with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and big burly housekeeper pretty much right away. He said he's not down there. He comes up here when we go to bed. We left soon after that, so I never found out anything more about the farm where the photo was taken, but I'm sure that there was some kind of evil presence around it. Have any of you guys ever experienced something similar? If you have, then please share with me, because this was definitely one of the creepiest things that I've ever had happen to us. So I was watching Full Metal Jacket with my dad the other day. We both love that movie and tend to get lost in it. But we like watching movies in the dark too because it keeps our focus on the screen. I was holding my dog, who was pretty elderly, 15 years old. She gave me a normal nudge that told me that she wanted to get off the couch and go to use the bathroom, so I place her down and continue to watch the movie. My TV is next to a small backwards L-shaped hallway that leads to both my room and the bathroom next to it. My dog's wee pad was in the corner of the L. I see her walk towards the hallway, and then for about maybe 10 seconds, I hear her nails quickly scratching the floor. And for an elderly dog who refuses to try and jump on the couch because of her arthritis, she ran as fast as she could and jumped onto my lap, whimpering and hiding her face in my stomach. I instinctively look towards the hallway, and I see a woman look around the corner back at me, and she smiled at me with a conniving smile, and then disappeared behind the wall. I quickly got up and looked around the corner, but when I did, there was nobody there. I was really upset about this because, well, whoever this person was, they just gave my dog the absolute fright of her life, and they got away with it too. And the other thing too is that my father saw it as well. It wasn't just me. But he didn't see a face. He allegedly just saw a silhouette, and he even hugged my dog so tight because of her crying. He even said to me, my name, "Did you see that?" After this, too, I moved her a wee pad, and I never let her go into the bathroom hallway after that. To this day, I still don't know what that was, but one thing I know for sure is that I'll never forget that face. Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all of our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. So one day, my boyfriend comes home from work like he normally did while I'm just laying on the sofa, and immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out of every other window in the house, then walks around the outside looking in the windows. Well, when he comes back from this confusing exploit, I ask him what the heck is going on and why he's being such a spaz. Well, I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you, and he took off as I walked up, he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was about 2 p.m, and the number of people out and about around the complex at that time, we came to the conclusion that it must have just been a curious neighbor or someone passing by happening to glance in. And with that, we mostly forget about it. If only that was the end. So for the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, and then when I went to answer, nobody was there. I would find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would just vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it. That is, until one night. So my boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being pretty loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face, his back to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking that I saw the reflection of my face in it. But then I remembered that the window was open, and it definitely wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbour walking up to the window to speak to us. Our main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of that window, so I spoke to him. Hello, can I help you? I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbour was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face didn't change expression. He didn't blink or move, just looked straight at me, a way that I've never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment, or crouched and contorted to look into the window. And at that, my heart sank. I buried my face into my boyfriend's chest and I closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought that I was messing with him. When I buried my face into his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at that window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time that he did, the man was gone, though. It was at this point, too, that I started to think about all of the little odd occurrences that I'd been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded up my apartment with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, though, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother too were on high alert. There were a couple of times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night, though, that I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work, a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had actually picked me up from work an hour earlier, and we had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while, just in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear a door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and the bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assume it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom or something, so you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater closet, the small storage space. I look to my right, and I see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I looked back to the door, and it's still creaking open very slowly. And then it opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around that door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. And that was going to be a big fat no from me. I ran barefooted out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I immediately called the cops, and when everybody was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. But after that, my boyfriend and I packed our stuff up, and we went to stay with my parents. And 6 months later, we moved 1,000 miles away from that town. And that was pretty much the end of it. Now, I live 1,000 miles away from where all of this happened, so naturally a part of me thinks that there's just no way that this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver, and I didn't answer. I'd go and get the package later. But then they knocked again, and again. And the third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. And when I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Which means that somebody was just knocking. And although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. I just thought that maybe somebody was trying to come and speak to me about something, and once they thought that I wasn't home, they must have left. But then, 2 days ago, I went out to get some groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check out the plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. I never thought it was a huge deal, until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was now locked. The deadbolt that can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I honestly assumed at first that somebody had robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister, I called my current, new boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. But when I did, nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken, and at this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched, nothing was stolen, but someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside of it. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he's not taking this all as lightly like my last boyfriend did. I filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras, and he put Nest cameras up all over the place too, and we're now on very high alert. I really truly hope that this is all just a sick coincidence, but if this man really has followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. So yesterday I was walking back home after hanging out with some friends. Before anyone asks too, I was completely sober and in my right mind. I've never been afraid to walk alone in the dark. I'm quite tall and intimidating looking from a distance, and I always bring a pocket knife when I know that I'll be walking in the dark. Anyways, so I was walking past some woods on the way back to my house, and I heard my mother's voice call out, "Gabriel, help," from inside the woods. I immediately recognized her voice, and I turned to look into the woods, as she kept calling my name over and over again. I couldn't see anything, it was just far too dark to see through the trees, but I called back, heading towards the woods. "Mum?" She sounded like she was in trouble and scared, and I assumed that she had gone for a run like she did every night and somehow got lost in the woods or something. But then I realized that it couldn't be her, because she had texted me like only 10 minutes before, asking me to come home soon to watch my little sister so she could go on a run. I stopped dead in my tracks and I called my mum. The voice in the woods was still calling my name and getting more frantic by the second. She picked up and I immediately asked her if she was in the woods, and she said no. She was back home with my little sister. But I swear to you that as soon as she said that she was back home, her voice stopped calling my name from inside the woods. I was immediately overcome with a wave of dread and fear that I've never felt anything like it before. Something in those woods was trying to lure me in by using my mother's voice, and it knew my full name, not just my nickname, which made things even scarier because the only person who calls me Gabriel is my mum. I immediately turned though, and I ran faster than I've ever run before back home. When I got back home, my legs just felt like jello and my lungs were burning. I opened the door and there was my mum sitting on the couch with my sister. Now, I would naturally think that this was some sort of a prank or something, but my mum just isn't one for pranks. And even if she was, there's just no way that she could have gotten home before me without me seeing her. And so, for me, the only remaining question is, what was in those woods? So this happened a couple of years ago when I was 13 and my brother was 11. My parents had gone out and thought that it would be better to leave me and my brother home alone, so that's why they did, and they left, taking my little sister, age 6, with them. Me and my brother were all the way down in our basement, which is where we had our video games set up, so the two of us were just downstairs playing Mario Kart on the Wii or something. We had the home phone in between us, just in case one of our parents called. About an hour goes by and the phone starts to ring. We look down and the caller ID is our uncle's. We decided to just let it ring out, and how our phone worked is that it would ring about 5 times and then stop. So, first ring, second ring, third ring, and the phone stops ringing. My brother doesn't pay attention to this, but I realize that the only reason for it to stop like that early is if somebody else in the home picked it up. But we were supposed to be home alone. I get really suspicious at this, and my paranoia gets the better of me. I take my brother with me, and we go upstairs to see that the phone is still there, but there's still a phone on the 3rd floor in my parents' room too, so we go towards the stairs, and what we saw chilled us to the bone. There was a man in his late 40s, early 50s, is all I could really tell, because the second that we saw him, me and my brother, we just screamed and ran straight out the front door and go straight to our neighbor's house. We immediately tell them what happened. They proceed to call the police, then our parents. They come fast, and I don't know what was wrong with this guy, but for some strange reason he just never left the house. He just stood there, and the police arrested him from what I heard, and he was placed in a mental hospital, but that's all I know. To this day, I really still don't know what to think about it all. But one thing that I do think about often is that what would have happened to me and my brother if my uncle didn't decide to call that day? So this happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbour who lived upstairs and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbour mentioned that she actually had a Ouija board and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal, and I honestly thought that it was a myth. We went into the garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing really eventful happened. Eventually, though, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit who would answer us. I honestly forgot who, but somebody asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with any of us. Interestingly enough, too, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical, I admit, and I thought it was just one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who had died like 6 months before. I started to get a little bit uncomfortable at this, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friend did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what this name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either, which really weirded me out. I asked what my grandmother wanted, and she started spelling out URGR, and then the planchette started going in weird circles and even going off the board, and was not spelling out anything that made any sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then it just said, "You are great. This will be important for later, so keep it in mind." Anyway, I just thought it was just moving it weirdly and then said goodbye. A few days later, though, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was really unexpected, too, as he was in great health, and it was right before Christmas, and everyone was just so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral,
I remember sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When the Ouija board, or my grandmother, initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I quickly realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette moved around just weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if maybe something was stopping my grandmother from completing the word and trying to warn me. The next few months, though, were just absolutely terrible as I started blaming myself and was convinced that I somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point, in fact, that I became suicidal, and the scary part is, my thoughts, I felt as if they weren't really mine. Now, I know that this is going to sound really weird, but it felt as if something or someone was trying to lead me to take my life, as they were really dark. I can't really explain it, but I admit that it might have just been guilt. I'm not too sure, but I felt like something was just watching me all the time, and I felt a really strange presence in the next few months after using this board. There's also the fact, too, that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights, and I just had a strange feeling and felt like I needed to walk away. And right when I did, the lights just shattered, and it would have injured me for sure if I was still standing underneath there. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I just felt a giant weight just come straight off my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if this spirit that I contacted to was even my grandmother in the first place. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts that I had. I honestly thought that maybe I was going crazy. Fast forward though, and I was at an overnight event at my school, and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and find some answers, hopefully. And at one point, the Ouija board said that it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out DEV. We started to panic a little bit, but then it spelled out a word that I forgot. I dismissed it though and thought that it was nothing again, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that apparently the word meant devil in another language. It was definitely confirmed to me then that it might not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There's also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me and it didn't have good intentions. To this day, I am still sort of convinced that this spirit only really tried to warn me about my grandfather passing so that when he passed, I would feel guilty. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to this spirit's influence to the point that I would almost take my own life in the end. Obviously, I don't know if that's actually what happened. It's impossible to know, right? But it's really the only explanation that I have for everything that happened. So this happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often, and it's definitely changed the way that I operate throughout life. For instance, I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. For the story's sake, though, I'll tell you that I was 25 and a pretty slender blonde at the time. So on a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to go to the 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up some odds and ends that we would require to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without trouble at the store, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were two country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable, as I assumed that they were making comments about me. All pretty innocent so far, I'll admit, but
Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed pretty quickly and power walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there too, because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you're on stage and are required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you're getting paid to. Thus why I'm not a bartender anymore, but I get to the self-checkout and hot on my tail are the two guys. I'm just sort of scanning my stuff and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now that they're right next to me. One is taller, muscular, and sort of average looking. The other is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty though, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. I'm not sure if they were high on something or had already been drinking for a while, but they continued to stare at me and our eyes awkwardly met. So I did the pleasant, Midwesterny thing to do, and I flashed them a quick half-assed, closed-lipped sort of smile to be polite. But the taller one starts trying to talk to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied with something like, yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." They walk closer to me and ignore their responsibility to scan their items. "Oh, that must be for your boyfriend, huh?" I flash the awkward, tight-lipped smile again, and I roll my eyes slightly. Like, this is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas? The taller one continues to try to talk to me, though. "You could come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time, if you know what I mean." I reply with, "No thanks, I'm good. I have plans already." Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he'd hoped, and starts using a more threatening tone, and moves very close to me all of a sudden, like 2 inches away. But I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think that he'd showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder too and says, "I see how it is. You probably only screw doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson if you want." Now, I'm not sure in what context he meant, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him though, I turn away so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I set on the scanner, to grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve, just in case I need to protect myself, acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker standing at her podium, and look at her with wide eyes trying to communicate that I do not feel safe and I may just need some help. I turn back to the machine though, and I slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me now. The machine actually malfunctions, just my luck, right, and starts beeping. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expression from "I'm planning to torture you for a couple of days and toss your body in a creek" to "just your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here." They actually tried to act like I knew them and we were friends, so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker, saying I was stealing something and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it though. She was a 6+ foot tall woman with some muscle on her, by the way. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. But anyways, she presses a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they're trying to act charming, and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. This machine seems to not be working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I'll ring you up at the actual register?" She puts her hands on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look like I gave her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees that I'm in danger here. So I pick up my things to follow her to the register that is near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchase but stand at the exit, assuming that they're waiting for me. Quite honestly, too, I felt like I was going to be walking to my death if I made my exit in that moment. But the worker keeps a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me that there really wasn't anything wrong with the machine that I was using. It just misread my credit card. Yeah, I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang the security to be ready to walk out to the parking lot and make sure you left safely when you were ready to leave. But then I saw you take that knife out and put it up your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. Good job. And as much as I'd like to see you show them that they picked the wrong chick to mess with, I'm glad that I was able to pull you aside and make sure you're safe. I see them waiting by the door for you there. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside, alright? Our security officer here and I are both still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave as well. In that moment, I just thought to myself, man, does this woman seriously deserve a raise? I thanked her, though, over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of and all that stuff. But as I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what's happening, and he was obviously very concerned and ready to come up there himself to kick some butt. A sweet sentiment, I'll admit. By the time that I hung up, though, the guys had thankfully given up by the looks of things and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling that they may still be in the parking lot waiting for me to walk out and see which vehicle was mine so that they could potentially follow me. My instant thought, though, was there's just really no way, right? They would be gone by now. But man, was I definitely wrong. The worker and the security guard escort me out, and as it was just after midnight, you can imagine just how empty the parking lot was. And towards the back of the lot, there sat a big old pickup truck running with the lights on, pointing towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that, so I'm assuming that they must have moved the truck to sit that way, so they had a full view of when I exited the store to go to my vehicle. It's a weird feeling when you're stalked like this. It feels a lot like you're being hunted down by a very hungry lion or something. When I unlocked my car, though, and they saw that it was me, the worker and the guard were looking directly at them, and that I wasn't getting in my car until he watched them leave, they then finally peeled out of the parking lot. And what I mean by this is that they seriously did some burnouts to establish that they were very ticked off and trying to intimidate us or something like that. And I mean, poor creeps, right? Boo-hoo. But I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I'm certain that they may have just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning on doing to me. I did write a long letter to the store manager too, and to their corporate location describing just how these employees protected me and how grateful I was for it. I really hope too that they earned promotions and bonuses and raises and all that stuff. The lady didn't know me at all and was even ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she did it anyways. Needless to say, though, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore, and never will again. This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I just had a strange feeling at some point that something just wasn't right for a few days. Like, I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. One night, I woke up at around 1 a.m, I think, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, I was sure that I woke her from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat too, I decided that I should probably take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and I enjoyed my shower. But a few minutes in, I heard the door move. Now, I never really close it, but still, it never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain, and I saw a shadow against it. And a look at my phone confirmed that somebody was definitely there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed that somebody was standing next to the shower curtain. It took me everything that I had not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed at my quick thinking, in fact. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later, steam was raising and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give way. Thank God for German quality work, right? I immediately called the cops, though, and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I immediately felt my throat closing up when I saw that it was missing, and realized that there's really only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in that flat, and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems as though that she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work and sometimes at night, and it's also possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about that. Ever since then, though, I have always insisted that the locks are changed when I move in to a new place. So this happened when I went camping. Two things in one night, too, both involving the same friend, both involving my need to go to the bathroom. So at around 10 p.m, I really needed to take a dump. I left our site to use the restroom, which was about maybe a quarter of a mile away. It's pitch dark, and as I'm walking, I see one of my friends who was with us walk from a path leading to an unused site onto the main path. This unused path was a good 50 yards away from our site's path. My friend has a very noticeable and peculiar gait, a way of walking, so I knew immediately that it was him. At multiple points, he turned around and asked, "Why are you following me?" Always a good 40 or so feet ahead of me as well. I would reply, "I literally told you guys that I was going to the bathroom," and question, "Why? Did you come from a different site?" And then he picks his pace up, and eventually I lose him in the darkness. I get to the restrooms without seeing him, take my dump, and upon returning to my site, where he of course is, I start asking why I'm being screwed with. Everyone denies my friend even left, and so that was weird, but okay, so they're messing around with me, no big deal. 3 a.m. rolls around, and I wake up needing to pee. No need to walk to the restrooms this time. I'll just walk off into the woods a bit. But as I walk back after taking my leak, I hear the distinct sound of a tent zipper opening. In the darkness, I can tell that it's my friend. Then I can barely see it, but definitely hear him zip it back up. As I get closer to the tents, I see him more clearly, and he walks a bit. He goes to light a cigarette, and I can see his face in the flint strikes of the lighter, even clearer when it manages to catch. He lights his cigarette, takes a puff, and says, "Can you hear me?" I say, "Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?" Again, much louder this time, "Can you hear me?" I'm like, "Yeah, are you trying to wake everyone up?" He kind of shakes his head at me and then just turns and walks towards the cars, maybe 30 feet away from him. Thinking that I'm being messed with again, I go to follow, but lose him behind a car, and I turn the corner of it, and he's just nowhere to be seen. I'm annoyed at this point. He thinks that he's so funny, right? So I go back to his tent. It's still closed, but when I get there, I can hear him faintly snoring inside of it. This immediately freaks me out, because I don't know what it was exactly that I saw, but it looked and sounded and walked just like my friend. I spoke to him quickly too, but he denied that he ever even left his tent or went through the woods ahead of me. I still scratch my head when I think about that night. So, to be quite blunt about this, my dog is pretty stupid. She started barking at me at like 12 a.m. the other night to go outside, and I obliged. I'm in the Utah, Colorado mountains area, and I've never really heard of any paranormal stuff here, so this is sort of doubly freaky. We step out onto the porch. It's that weird, eerie quiet when a predator is near sort of thing, and I don't think much of it because the only predator around here is coyotes, and they tend to keep near the street and away from the house. I figure my dog has to use the restroom, so I sweep the yard with my flashlight. It's the night after a new moon, so naturally it's pitch. No eye shine, no weird movement or anything. But she's reluctant to leave the porch after begging to be let out, which was weird. She just sort of stays near the stairs. There's a sort of road or a path or a trail around our house that's wide enough for a car to go through, and also has a sort of woodshed at the end for winter. So I shine my light down that way. If anything's going to sneak up on us, it's probably going to come from that direction, because the wood piles are like 7 foot high. While she's messing around, I keep my light in that direction and notice that it's hitting something. Whatever it is, too, it almost looks like the moon coming up through the trees. It's bright, but not glowy bright, more like a soft reflective light. And at first, I don't really think much of it, until my idiot brain remembers that there's no moon tonight. And then the dog winds herself around something and gets caught up as she practically throws herself at the door. I unleash her, leave the leash, and I throw myself inside too. Obviously, I have no idea what this was. I mean, it didn't give me the I'm about to die sense or anything, but it definitely alarmed me, and it wigged my dog out as well. Also, I don't know if this is just a coincidence or bears remark, but I also saw a weird ball of fire streak overhead in broad daylight a few weeks ago, if that helps at all. What do you guys think it could be, though? When I was growing up, my parents had a place on the edge of town. One side was the neighborhood, and the other was hundreds of acres of woods. We used to go exploring the woods back there to just kill time and build forts and stuff. You know, typical boy stuff like that. I was probably around maybe 13 or 14 years old at the time, I think. We never would go too far, because we were scared if something bad happened that nobody would get to us quickly. As well as the fact that we never really told our parents where we were or what we were up to. So they wouldn't even know where to begin to look. Plus, cell phones weren't extremely common back then. Now, one day we felt extra brave, so we decided to go even deeper into the woods this day. Where we lived at the time, the best way to describe these woods were super dense with tons of underbrush, so you couldn't see out above or too far ahead of you. So it always seemed just sort of dark and very unnerving. And this day it was almost misty and drizzly, so it made it extra creepy to begin with. But we travelled what I would describe as maybe half a mile to a mile, I suppose. And while I wasn't 100% familiar with the area, as we had never gone this far, I knew of no paths or entrances or roads leading into the woods. So we picked a random spot and just began cutting down smaller trees to build a fort. After a couple of hours, and being a typical narrow-minded teen, we decided to look around the immediate area for something interesting. We walked a couple of 100 yards and we found just a sort of barely visible path. And of course, when you find a path like this, you have to follow it, right? We followed the narrow path through the dense trees, and it winded back and forth for what seemed like an eternity. But finally we came to a clearing, and we also found an old 2-story farmhouse, as I would describe it anyway. The treetops sort of loomed over the roof of the house, making it seem a lot darker than probably what it was. And what do you think that we did? Well, of course, we had to go inside to check it out. At this point, we were soaked from being out in this drizzly mist, but I came to the door, which was already cracked open slightly, and I opened it a bit more and peered inside.
Nothing too spectacular by any means, just a few pieces of rotting furniture and trash littered the dust-covered floor. Parts of the floor were gone as well, and you could see the darkness below. But the whole house had a bad lean to it too, so I didn't really want to go upstairs, as it could very easily have fallen over. But upon further investigation, we found a few sort of old handmade creepy dolls. The white fabric that they were made from was sort of dirty and tattered. Their button eyes had long since fallen out, but the whole place just had a really super eerie vibe to it. It was also getting late in the evening by this point, so I thought that it's probably time to go. We left the house and started walking back up the path. 30 feet out or so, I decided to check to see if there were any other paths or a road leading to said house. Didn't see anything. And as I turned to look back at the house to sort of navigate and see if there were any other paths anywhere, I swear to you that I saw something move away from one of the second-story windows as the curtain was moving just ever so slightly. I sort of figured that my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, so I didn't think too much of it. We made it back home eventually, though, and the next day I told one of my close friends about the house and that I was going to take him there. He comes over and we head that way, and I made sure to tell him about all the details on it during our trek there. We get to the path, and we're fixing to round the last bend before the house came into view. But upon coming to the clearing, I could hardly believe my eyes, because the house was now completely burned to the ground. And I mean that nothing was left except the concrete risers that it was setting on. No ashes, no still smouldering embers, nothing. In fact, the ground was still wet from the previous day's precipitation. My friend sort of looked at me in disbelief, as I'd been pulling his leg the entire time. I told him no, I swear it was here yesterday. I never saw any smoke that evening, though, which you could have easily seen from my parents' house. Being the young and curious individual I was, though, I had to figure out what happened. So I walked up to where the house was, and the only thing that I found was one of those creepy handmade dolls sitting in the middle of where the house stood. Strange thing, too, is that it didn't look like it was burnt. We never really went back into those woods again after that as well. I still drive by those woods on a daily basis on my way to work, though, and a part of me, I'll admit, wants to go back in there to see what I'll find. So, in high school, I was the weirdo, always reading classic literature, hair dyed, listening to punk and ska, etc. I had a small group of like-minded friends, though, but other than us, it was a very straight white school filled with very closed minds. Until the arrival of Mr. X, that is. Mr. X was different to all the other teachers. His clothes were unkempt, for instance, but in a sort of cool, edgy sort of way. His hair was long and scruffy, and he had an air of rebellion about him. He was, of course, an English teacher, and immediately we became friends. I say friends because I'm now old enough to know how inappropriate that was, but I'd spend lunchtimes in his room talking about Oscar Wilde, feminism, and etc. We'd listen to cool music and talk about concerts that we'd been to. He'd often say things like, "I can't believe you're only 14, you're so mature." I was flattered and felt like he truly saw me for who I was. Writing this 20 years later, though, I feel embarrassed as heck, but that's really how it was. So a few months after he joined the school, though, something just changed. Mr. X started sitting too close to me during our lunchtime hangouts. He began asking me to meet him at a local nightclub, famous for letting underage girls in too. And I started to view him as less of a lone wolf and more as a bit of a sad and desperate person. And then his conversations turned sexual. Little comments at first, like, "No one could ever call you flat-chested," and "I bet you're more experienced in the bedroom," etc. And any air of mystery or intrigue I'd previously believed that he had soon disappeared. Eventually, I just stopped hanging out with him and I moved on. I would think about him occasionally, I'll admit, but more with a shudder than anything. 2 years later, I opened the local newspaper to see Mr. X's face on the front page. I quickly flipped through and he'd been discovered hiding in school in a female student toilet cubicle with mirrors glued to the tops of his shoes. And he was basically upskirting whoever was in the next cubicle. And added to that, he was discovered to have recordings and photos of numerous students, all taken without permission. To this day, I still have no idea if any involved me, but there were thousands of them found. Thankfully, the police arrested him and he was put in jail for 10 years, but the slight irony is that I am now an English teacher too. I guess my love of literature just never went away, even in spite of all of his creepiness. So there's an area of Quebec that my mum just will not go near. We don't go into Canada that often, but we used to have an aunt who lived in Quebec and she owned a cottage in a small sort of remote lake. My summers were spent at this cottage, and a lot of my family would also come up to visit. Behind the cottage was a huge forest that spanned for miles and miles as well. We used to go on hikes and remark about how untouched it was. It was so big, in fact, that you could easily get lost in there and just never come out. Now, one day, my mum, my aunt, 2 uncles, and myself, age 13, were out on a hike heading towards a raspberry patch that we knew of when we heard a scream like nothing you had ever heard before. It was definitely a human scream from a female, but it was so loud that we all dropped to the ground as if someone was shooting bullets. I really don't know why this was the reaction that we had, but just down we went. All of us stood up eventually, though, just sort of stunned and looked around. For about, I would say, 2 to 3 minutes, we looked in every direction, assuming that it was something near us. The scream honestly felt like it was right on top of us and sort of all around us at the same time. If you had told me that a jet fighter had passed over us like 30 feet up, I probably would have believed you at the time. It was at this point, too, that I remember my mum suggesting that we should go back. This sound clearly wasn't from any animal, nor was it from a machine. It was human, very human. But my uncle suggested that we just keep going, and so everyone else just kept going in further. By now, 2 to 3 minutes had passed, and we were all still on edge, but we assumed that it had to be something totally explainable. But then it happened, and as God is my witness, I'll never forget what I saw. The scream came back, but this time it was accompanied by something. My aunt saw it first and pointed to it, then we all saw it. About 50 feet away from us, and probably 30 feet up in the air, was a person gliding through the forest. It looked like someone sitting cross-legged, all in black, with long black hair. We didn't see where they started, but we could see them, or it, moving through the treetops, just under the canopy, at what had to be about 10 or 15 miles per hour. We watched too as it just went past, deeper and deeper into the forest. We could see about maybe a football field's length away, and just kind of stood there frozen until they were out of sight. And then we ran, and we ran until we were back at that cottage. After that, my mum never went back into that forest again. My uncle went out with a rifle the following day, but came back empty-handed. The cottage was sold years later once my aunt passed away, and nothing was ever really seen again. Now, I just want to inform you guys that it definitely was not a bird. It was not some sort of a pet monkey that escaped or anything like that as well. It was definitely a person, 100% a person, and whatever it was just flew through that forest as if it could fly on its own. My aunt went to her grave believing that it must have been a witch, and if you had told me for certain that it was, that would really answer a lot of things. But to give you an idea of just how it looked, think the girl from The Ring, only in all black. I know that I'll probably go to my grave wondering what I saw, but I do hope that one day I get an answer. So for reference, my boyfriend is about 6'3" and 275 to 300 pounds. He's very stocky, has a military-style haircut, actually is prior military, usually wears a shirt with guns on it in some way, and also has a very fierce beard. This is important for the story, and it's why I bring it up. So about 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved into a house with a couple of roommates near downtown in a big city of Michigan. I had sent him to the store for some staples or something while I started unpacking. And he texted me just after getting to the store saying that he had the weirdest thing happen in the parking lot, but he would tell me when he got home. 10 minutes later, he texted again saying that he was super creeped out and jokingly said, "If I'm not on my way in 5, send help." This is his normal kind of humor, so I didn't think too much of it. And when he got home, he told me that on his way in from the parking lot, a man stopped him offering compliments on his beard. It actually happened a lot, so he didn't think much of it. But the guy was dressed as if he was a lawyer or a real estate agent with nice shoes and a nice watch. Very clean cut, so he wasn't too uncomfortable. He just said thanks and began walking inside. The guy continued walking with him, asking where he was from, what he did for a living, and if he had kids or a wife. His, my boyfriend, gut lit up like fireworks at this point, and after working in mental health for some time, he knew to trust it too. He made up some answers and told him to have a nice day, and the man said if you're ever interested in a new line of work, you're just the guy we're looking for. My boyfriend continued walking without responding and didn't look back though. A few minutes into shopping, though, he noticed the same man was appearing in the same aisles as him, but would then turn around and go the other way. At one point, when he texted me, he said that he was sure the man snapped a photo of him from the other end of the aisle. We both commented on the craziness of that and said that must be some sort of human trafficking thing or something. But let it go, as it was over now and we didn't really want to believe it. Days later, we ran to the store to pick up some late-night snacks. We parked the car what felt like miles from the store. My boyfriend is the worst at this, and began to walk in. Thankfully, I don't really startle easily when we get out together because we both conceal carry, so I know if someone tried to attack either of us, we're decently prepared. But even I still jumped when a man's voice yelled out my boyfriend's name and added, "and his pretty wife." My boyfriend said keep walking and don't hesitate. Thankfully, I knew what he meant, and I hauled my butt into the entryway of the store as I watched them walk and talk while watching for any suspicious people or cars around them. When they were almost inside, I went into the store and started chatting with the greeter, so he didn't get a chance to talk to me. The man again showed up in the aisles that we were in, and at one point even looked to be texting on his phone, but was holding it up in front of him. I'm almost positive that he took a photo of us at that point. We didn't finish getting snacks and we just left the store. I waited with the greeter as my boyfriend got to the car, so I didn't have to walk through the dark lot. I'd been a powerlifter at that point for a little over a year and was in great shape. I mean, I was in the gym every day at the same time due to my work schedule and usually had my girl roommate with me, but today I was alone for a quick and light lifting session. And I wasn't even a minute into my gym time when that same guy walked in. I had never seen him there before, and instantly I knew something was up. I texted my boyfriend, but he was away for the military, so he was now panicking from a distance. "Remember your training and keep your cool," is what he said. He wasn't in gym attire too, and didn't have a bag with him. We were also at the gym furthest from the area that we were from. They had the best equipment for my personal needs and gains, so I'm not sure why he would have chosen it, as he didn't have the I love gym vibe by any means. But he came over and said hello, and I politely said hello back, but didn't continue the conversation. He said a few more things, and a guy a few machines over I think could tell that I was uncomfortable. He came over and pretended to be my boyfriend, asking if I was ready to go.
I said yes and just needed to grab my things. The creeper man asked where my husband was, and I pretended not to hear him as I kept walking. When I came out, he was gone, but my best fake friend was waiting on the bench outside the locker room. He said that the man had left, but he had let the staff know what happened, and they said that he wasn't even a member, but said that he was there to pick up his girlfriend. I don't know, but my new best friend walked me to my car, and I just switched gyms after that. Thankfully, we now live very far away from the city, and I've never encountered him again, and neither has my boyfriend. But I honestly believe that they were trying to recruit him to make big money, possibly selling women, and that I may have just been a bonus woman to sell. All I can say is, thank God for strangers who stand up and save women like me. While returning to New Mexico from a visit to my friend's family in Iowa, we were caught in a snowstorm on the Texas Panhandle. We were on Highway 60 right outside of a town called Canadian when we went off the road in this little Honda car. We tried digging it out and using the floor mats for traction, but to no avail. We could see what appeared to be the lights of a farmhouse nearby, and although it was 2 a.m., we elected to knock on the door and see if we could get help instead of freezing to death in a rare Texas blizzard out in the middle of nowhere. A tiny old woman answered the door, and when I say tiny, I mean 4 foot something, and ancient to boot. We explained, though, that we were stuck and needed to pull out of the ditch and how far to the next town, etc. Her tiny, maybe 5 foot something ancient husband came out and said that he'd pull us out with Zuzu and to follow him to the barn. Out in the barn was an old Ford Highboy with a CB radio and a .357 revolver in the front seat pocket. We all climbed in the cab. He rubbed the dash and said, "Come on, Zuzu," and proceeded to take us where we had to go off-road and yanked the little car out with no problem. We made it to Canadian and stayed in the nastiest roach motel that I'd ever been in, and slept on top of the covers with all of my clothes on. The next day, we drove back to New Mexico with no other incidences. Since I was on Highway 60 pretty regularly, I figured that I would stop in during the day and just drop off a gift and say thanks next time that I was in the area. The only problem is that right outside of Canadian, Texas on Highway 60, near that curve, there is no house in sight. No little old people, no barn, no Zuzu either. I've driven by there dozens of times since we went off-road that night in December, and I've pulled up the area on Google Maps, and I can tell you that there is just no trace of them anywhere. In the end, too, my buddy and I just concluded that guardian angels got us unstuck from the snow, and then they just vanished. I grew up in La Crosse, WI, a semi-small city with a low crime rate, at least back in the day when I was like 14. It was such a quiet city that almost nobody locked their doors. People would say hi to each other on the street. You could pretty much go to anyone's house for dinner and your parents wouldn't be too nervous about it too, etc. And on top of that, you could always walk home by yourself at night from your middle school basketball game without fear, which is what I was doing on this particular night. So it had been a long game and went later than normal, and my parents both had to work in the morning, so they didn't want to go, which was fine. They went to all the other games, so they could get to bed early. It was an 8-minute walk from my middle school to my house, so there were no concerns about my safety. So I'm just walking, right? I'm wearing a pink sweater and jeans over my basketball jersey. My hair is a sweaty mess, but I was in a good mood because it was a good game, so I was walking in a sort of relaxed fashion, unconcerned and pretty much unaware, and that was when I felt it. I can't explain how I knew, but somehow I just knew that I was in some sort of danger. I looked around me, and parked near the blacktop fence was a Jeep with its lights off. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew someone was for some reason. So I quickly ducked my head and walked away from it, hoping that I didn't catch their attention. No such luck, though, because the Jeep started following me. It pulled up next to me and I saw the window open and I just booked it. I didn't look back, I just ran. I had such a negative feeling about that Jeep, I didn't stop until I could see my parents' house and I thought that I was safe. But just as I stopped to catch my breath, I heard an engine rev behind me and that same Jeep was tearing down the street, beelining towards me. I was in a position where I couldn't run anywhere safe in time, a big open space near the road, so I just sort of stood there frozen in terror. I was backing up and must have looked every bit the victim with my sweaty hair and white face, because just as the Jeep pulled up near me and the door opened, some old guy across the street yelled something. I don't even know what the guy actually said, but the Jeep's door slammed shut and it just peeled away. I didn't even thank the guy in the end, which I feel bad about because he might have just saved me from something truly terrible. I instead just quickly ran home. I threw myself inside when I got there and I slammed the door behind me, scaring the life out of my mum, who was just heading to bed. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her and she woke up Dad. We considered calling the police, but since I didn't have a facial description or a license plate or anything, there wasn't much to give them in the end. All I knew is that it was a dark Jeep and it chased me. That night, my parents decided to never let me walk home from school again, and a week later, the newspaper said that there had been a gang rape of a young woman at a nearby parking garage, 5 minutes from my house. And yes, a Jeep was mentioned. So this must have been nearly 20 years ago now, I think. Man, do I feel old? Anyway, over a few months, all these posters of missing women kept going up in the neighborhood that I lived in, and neighborhoods nearby as well. And one night, we were sitting in a bar, and there were probably about, 20 people in there total. Everyone's having a nice time, though. No dramas, nothing out of the ordinary. When this guy walks in and sits down, he was wearing sort of regular, not noteworthy clothing. He didn't talk or say anything strange. He wasn't even acting in a weird way. But for some reason, just the whole room went cold. People stopped talking, shuffling around in their seats. It was like this dark, sort of unrecognizable energy had entered the room. I remembered feeling sort of breathless and like I just wanted to run from the room or something. Everyone else in the bar seemed to be responding the same way too. The guy walked over to the bar though and asked for a drink, and I've never seen this happen before to a sober customer who hasn't caused any trouble. But the barman just turned him away, and then the guy left. Almost immediately, too, the atmosphere went back to what it had been. I walked up to the bar, and I ordered a drink, and I asked the bartender why he refused the guy a drink. We were friendly as I drank there regularly, and he said that the guy just made him uncomfortable in a way that he'd never experienced before, that he couldn't bring himself to serve him a drink. Other people in the bar began to agree, but no one could put their finger on exactly why. Well, a couple of weeks later, I was watching the news, and there was a breaking story about how someone found a dismembered limb in a rubbish bag. The remains belonged to the missing woman whose missing photos we'd been seeing for months. They were all sex workers, and they showed a photograph of the serial killer that they caught, and yep, you guessed it. Sure enough, it was the guy in the bar that night who no one could bear to be in the room with. I can't explain why, because when he walked in and asked for a drink, he really didn't do anything strange. But he brought this just terrifying, inhumane, unrecognizable energy with him. Sometimes, too, I even wonder if maybe he just killed someone that night, or killed someone an hour or so later, and that's why the presence of evil felt just so visceral that night. So this happened 2 years ago now. A typical normal day in my suburban neighborhood. My wife asked me to run to the grocery store for something. It was around 2 or 3 p.m. When she asked me, I was sitting in the dining room, which was right next to the garage, so instead of walking to the front door and then all the way around in the front of my house to my car in the driveway, I just went out the door next to me that led into the garage. I hit the button to open the door and it started to rise. I walked over to the door and ducked to walk out before it was finished rising. And then I stopped dead in my tracks when there were 2 people standing right in front of me in my driveway. A very overweight man and a very overweight woman. This caught me totally off guard, and I probably muttered some type of hello and then asked if I could help them with something. But before I had time to focus on their response, I noticed the woman wasn't looking at me like the man was, because she was holding a fake baby in her arms, cradling it and telling it to shush. This left me flabbergasted, but I immediately assumed they, or at least she, might be mentally disabled. I looked over to the man, and without missing a beat, he asked me if I could give them a ride to the store. I made some sort of excuse as to why I couldn't take them, even though that's where I was going, and the man's face just turned bright red. The woman never looked up at me, and I walked around them and got in my car. I locked it, hit the garage door opener on my visor, and then I called my wife. Meanwhile, the man is glaring at me through my windshield. I told my wife what was going on and to make sure all the doors and the windows were locked, just in case. Before backing out of my driveway, I waited for the 2 people to start walking away, and eventually they did. I asked my wife if she wanted me to stay, but she wasn't too worried, and she told me that it was fine, that she still would like me to go and get what she needed. The grocery store was only a couple of miles away from my house, and so I grabbed the item, paid, and left as quickly as possible, still kind of worried about the strange encounter I had. As I was driving back home, I saw the 2 people walking down the sidewalk towards me. The woman was still looking down, and the man saw me again, got very obviously upset, and then walked out into the middle of the road in front of me. He was saying something, but I just drove around him and I continued home. My wife called the local non-emergency number, and they told us that they'd send an available officer to the area to drive around and take a look. I never did see them again. I have no idea if they were going house to house asking for a ride or what. A part of me feels bad, thinking that they both might just have been mentally disabled and just wanted a ride to the store. But the whole encounter was just too bizarre. I mean, the man didn't seem disabled, so I honestly have no idea. If they hadn't surprised me and spooked me the way that they did, I may have actually given their requests some more consideration. I was a late bloomer in terms of sexuality. I had a traumatic experience that made me not want to date much in high school, so it's surprising that not even a year after graduating, I was so excited to date Jeff. He was older than me by a few years, and messaged me on MySpace that he thought that I was pretty and wanted to go out. We went out on a few dates and held hands, and he thought that it was cute that I had never been kissed before. Things honestly seemed to be okay, and he said that he respected that I wanted to go very slow. But one night, he acted really strange. His friend Matt was over, and they kept joking that they should take me to see their friend. I knew something was off because they kept joking that they shouldn't do it, that I was too pure and that I would freak out. This was over 10 years ago, so I'm not 100% sure, but I don't remember agreeing to go to this guy's house. I remember asking them to just take me home. I was uncomfortable, and I didn't want to meet this guy. After all, this was supposed to be a date night. Matt wasn't even supposed to be there, and now I'm going to see some other guy? My intuition told me that something was really off about this. The drive, though, was up a long, unlit paved road up a mountain. On the way, Jeff and Matt were saying things like, "Oh man, she's not going to be your girlfriend after this," and "Dude, we're all going to hell for this." I sort of tried to act like I wasn't crying in fear in the back seat. All I asked was where we were going, which they laughed at. So I just stayed silent and tried to focus on anything that could tell me where we were going, but it was in a really rural area that I've never been to before. But we got to the house, a single-story 2-bedroom surrounded by nothing but unlit nothingness. The friend was an older man, late 30s, who I was told was a porn producer. He showed me his red room and Jeff pushed me into it. And at that, I let out the terrified scream that I'd been holding in the entire time. I can still hear how it sounded, and it was awful. To this day, I can still hear how it sounded. It was truly awful, but they all laughed, and I walked to the couch in the living room and stayed there the entire night. I was too afraid to even use the bathroom. And the rest of the night was spent with them just drinking beer while I sat on the couch digging my nails into the palms of my hands, trying not to cry. I didn't eat or drink anything that was offered. Matt mentioned that Jeff used to bring his girls to this house to have sex and whatnot. Their creepy old friend joked that he could record it. Lots of uncomfortable sex jokes too. But the creepy old guy told me that virgins can make a lot of money doing porn. Like he was trying to do me some sort of twisted favor. And although it was almost half my life ago, I remember exactly how that room smelled, how the fake leather couch felt, how time seemed to move at an inconsistent speed. I really don't remember how I responded to that, but after it, he backed off. Nothing bad happened that night, but when I got home, I just collapsed in the shower crying. I really don't know why I was taken to that house in the first place, but after that night, Jeff's tune just changed from "we can go at whatever speed you want" to "this trauma is really holding you back. You need to just have sex and get it over with." Looking back on it all, though, I'm just really grateful that I listened to my intuition and I ended things with Jeff and cut ties with all of his friends. My current boyfriend and I were talking about weird things that happened to us, and I remembered this night, so I thought that I would share it. But when I told him, he looked terrified, and it was only then that it occurred to me that that night could have gone very differently. When I was a small child of about 5, I think, I had an experience that I just cannot explain. It's one of my first memories that I can vividly remember. I've thought about it for years, but I still just can't explain it. So we lived in a new trailer home and had just moved in. I remember I still had boxes in my room because we hadn't finished unpacking yet. I woke up in the middle of the night, and a man with a long trench coat and a hat, think sort of Dick Tracy, was in my room next to my bed. He was very tall, but also he was all black. I wasn't scared at all, and in fact I felt very comfortable and a sense of sort of ease or safety in the presence of this man. He told me that it was not safe in my room and I needed to grab my blanket and pillow and follow him. I did as he said, and he led me to our living room, and he told me to lay down on our couch and sleep there. I did as he said, and I remember him telling me to cover up and to go back to sleep. I tucked myself in, and he told me that I was safe now. He then just sort of floated backwards down the hall out of sight, and eventually I fell asleep. When my dad found me on the couch in the early morning, the sun wasn't up yet, he asked me why I was on the couch. I told him that the man told me that it wasn't safe in my room and I needed to sleep on the couch. I remember him asking me what man and where did this guy go. He quickly searched the house though and checked the locks and whatnot, but found nothing out of place. I've never had sleep paralysis, I've never had night terrors, and I've also never seen this guy again. But when I googled this, what I saw was that others have seen the same thing as me, but it's always a bad thing. My experience, though, just wasn't scary at all. My experience was comfortable, in fact, and I felt at ease. And I guess that why I'm here is to ask all of you guys, has anyone here had a similar positive experience to this?